I just pressed the Let's Go Live button, which means we've got to wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internets before we go ahead and get started. Let's make sure that things are alive and cracking over at YouTube. We're, of course, alive and well over there, our home base. We've got Facebook, looks like that's warming up. We've got Twitch, which always takes a quick minute. We're multi-streaming on Rumble. We're on Twitter. We're on Odyssey. We're all over the place. And we're always just waiting on Twitch. Twitch, they're a little bit slow sometimes, but that's okay. But it looks like they're warming up, and so we'll see and make sure that we're alive and well here on YouTube before we jump into the show. And it looks like we're alive and well, so let's get into high gear, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Grueller. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We've got judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. It is Kyle Rittenhouse trial day 6, and we had a lot of testimony, some really good stuff we're going to get into. We're going to start off by talking about Gaige Grosskreutz, who was an alleged victim, also sort of an assailant in this trial, and he came in today and we heard a lot from him. We have a whole segment today on the direct exam, which of course is Thomas Binger asking a friendly witness, Gaige Grosskreutz, a bunch of questions. And so we're going to go through that, and we're going to look at this in a light most favorable to the prosecution, to Gaige Grosskreutz, to the idea that Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty because it's their witness, and we want to give them the benefit of the doubt. So let's just analyze it according to those terms, see if we can give them the benefit. Then we'll see what happens during the cross-examination. So in our first segment, we'll do the direct. In our second segment, Corey Chirafisi comes out, and then he kind of gets into it with this witness, Gaige Grosskreutz. During a cross-examination, many people are saying that, it's kind of the end of the case right here. We'll be analyzing it, and of course, you can be the one to decide. So we're going to take a look at that. And then in the last segment, we'll kind of take a look at all the leftover witnesses that we've got that happened today in day 6. We've got a number of Kenosha police officers. We have a woman from the crime lab who did some analysis on the bullets. And we had actually a live streamer, somebody who got another video admitted. So the guy who was talking about militias. So if you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. That's our home base. And you can use a form if you want to participate in it. Of course, this is a live stream. So if you want to ask a question, something a little bit more substantive, you can go over there. If you're a supporter, you can use that form. If you are somebody who's over on YouTube, Super Chats are working. They show up on the screen. They look just like that. That was from the Sanity Revolt. Says, I just finished paralegal school. Should I get experience first or go straight to law school? It's a good question. I wonder when that one came in. Was that earlier today? So it's a good question. I would say, if you want to be a lawyer, you do not need experience as a paralegal. Just go right through to law school. If that's what your end goal is. If you think that going to paralegal school is going to give you some leg up in law school, I don't see it that way at all. If you think that's what you're going to get, kind of sounds like that, I wouldn't go that route. I just go right ahead. So that's what it looks like, and that's what happens. If there's a super chat, I answer it at the end of every segment, and so you can, of course, support the show that way as well. If you're looking for clips of the program, because the show is long, if you're looking for a way to share the little bits and pieces that you don't get to during the actual broadcast, we have a clips channel. Don't forget Robert Grueller ESQ Clips. You can head on over there, and you can just sort of, what we're doing with the Kyle Rittenhouse case is we're breaking it up sort of by witnesses. And so if you sort of remember, who was that guy? I want to watch that again. The clips channel is a good place to go for an archive, as it were. And so, all right, without any further ado, let's get into it. Kyle Rittenhouse trial, day 6. Let's take a look at the witness list. Of course, we're still in the government's case in chief. Thomas Binger led most of the direct examinations today. We had a lot of new witnesses come in, but we're going to spend most of the show today and this first segment entirely on Gaige Grosskreutz. Grosskreutz. You're going to hear it pronounced a bunch of different ways, and so you're probably going to hear me also butcher it, but Gaige Grosskreutz. And what happened here today is, of course, this is a victim or alleged victim, also an assailant. You can see that he's over here. He is one of the still living victims, and so this guy finally came out in court today and testified. And so we're going to hear a lot from him, a lot of clips from the direct examination, a lot of clips from Corey Chirafisi, who did the cross-examination and really challenged him and got some really damning sound bites out of him that are, I think, going to really leave a mark in the jurors' minds. So we're going to hear a lot from him in segments 1 and segments 2. And then in our final segment, we're going to wrap it up with the rest of these 4 individuals. So we have Heather Williams. She was with the crime lab, firearms person. We're going to hear about bullets and ammunition with her. Jason Kreuger, he's with the Kenosha Police Department. He was on patrol. And so he was actually the other guy who was working with this other officer, Pep over here. Pep Moretti was the other officer. Jason Kreuger was also in that vehicle as they approached Kyle Rittenhouse. Then we had Kristin Harris. He's a Rundown live streamer. There's a website apparently called Rundown. And then we have a KPD, Kenosha police officer, Detective Ben Antaramian. And so a lot of witnesses today. We're going to get through a lot. We're going to go quickly so that we can get to your questions and comments at the end of every segment. And so before we jump into it, we do have to make a quick note of something new that happened. Notice this when trial kicked off this morning. Kyle Rittenhouse got a haircut, didn't he? On Friday, that's the do that he was sporting. And he looks a little bit cleaned up over here on Monday. And so, that type of stuff is important. His hair looks a little bit, less wavy, a little bit more organized, a little bit cleaner of a cut there. And so you're seeing more of that as the trial unfolds. People are wanting to keep their images polished, and so it looks good. So, okay, let's also take a look at the trial board. We have Judge Schrader there in the middle. Nothing really changed. We're still down 2 jurors. One juror had a bad joke. The other one was a woman who had a medical issue. And so no big changes over here. We also can see on our counts list that we're really talking a lot about this one today. Count 5, attempted intentional homicide. Gaige Grosskreutz was wounded, not killed. And so the idea was that the speculation being that Gaige was going to create this theme, this narrative that there was an active shooter and he was this hero who was running in to try to save the day. And so we're going to get a lot of that testimony. Recall that there were 2 days in question really that we're talking about. We're going to hear about a couple of these days, but really we're paying most attention to August 25th, which was a Tuesday of 2020. And so Gaige Grosskreutz came out today, and he has his first line of questioning with Thomas Binger, and they're talking about all of his training as a medic, as a medical person. He's actually an EMT. And so we actually get a long laundry list of all of his medical credentials. And it actually sounded like he was testifying almost like a police officer, somebody who maybe had done this before. Went through everything. 8 hours training this, 4 hours training here. I want to be a doctor. I like to help people, blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff. And so it was interesting. That was a good justification for him being there in the first place. He wasn't out there protesting. He wasn't out there like Kyle Rittenhouse, who was sort of anti-protesting, according to the state's narrative. He was somebody else who was out there as a medic, an almost qualified medic, right? Somebody with EMT training. And so they started this off, and I thought they did a nice job at trial today going with this narrative that Gaige of all the witnesses that we've heard of today, he's just this nice guy who was out there, wanting to serve everybody with all of his EMT training. Here is Thomas Binger and Gaige this morning.
Do you remember approximately how long you worked as a paramedic?
I'd say about a year.
Were there ever times in which you had to deal with someone suffering from a gunshot wound?
Yes, I have.
What was that like?
It's difficult. Gunshots can be very traumatic. And I mean traumatic in the sense of the physiology of what it can do to the body. Obviously, there are numerous factors that go into it: the size of the caliber, where the person's shot, how many times, and when you are practicing in school, it is much different from when you actually go and put your hands on somebody who is bleeding. There's lots of blood, screaming. Generally speaking, there's somebody there that's frantic, so that not only are you having to focus on the patient, but you have to deal with the surrounding situation, which can be potentially, like I said, a frantic family member, say if it's an accident or self-inflicted. But also, it can be a dangerous situation to go into because, generally speaking, I mean, you shoot people to hurt them, and there's always that potential of continued on-scene violence. So it can be very hectic.
Yeah, so that's Gaige, who is somebody who got shot, explaining what it's like to treat somebody who has been shot. So you have this interesting juxtaposition where he's talking about this in a very clinical, detached way. If you are treating somebody who's a gunshot victim, well, it's chaotic, it's traumatic. There may be ongoing violence. You can see that physiologically what happens to a person's body, it's very, shocking. And so there's all sorts of problems that happen. And I am a clinician. I'm somebody who's very well trained. That's why I was there in the first place. And so he's sort of talking about this in a way that he's very detached from it. But the jurors are going to see, we're not going to show it here on the show, but they're going to see a bunch of different images of his elbow blown open. Basically, he goes through and he describes later in his testimony, I think we're going to get to it, saying that a large portion of his bicep was just sort of blown right off of his arm. And the jurors are going to see a number of those images. Thomas Binger played all of them, published them all in front of the jurors, and you see blood and guts and just gore all over the place. And so now the jurors are going to connect this with this story, and they're going to say, good Lord, that guy was just talking about this being a very traumatic, horrific ordeal, and suddenly, he was actually living that. So I think it's going to be, something that leaves a mark because they are going to see some of those gruesome photos. And remember, most people in society haven't seen photos like that. I think most people, aren't maybe as into, true crime or whatever it is as maybe the rest of us are. And so a lot of this is going to be very shocking for the jurors. Now, we're also going to be talking about something that's called drawing the sting in this line of testimony. Remember that Gaige Grosskreutz is somebody who is a victim, alleged victim in this case. He was shot by Kyle Rittenhouse. They got to bring him in here to testify. Rosenbaum's dead. Huber is dead. He is one of the surviving witnesses. They already brought in McGinnis. The other guy is just a no-name guy, right? Unknown person. And so he's a key person. We got to hear him testify. So they had to bring him in here, but they know that, he kind of has some shady stuff in his background that the defense is going to latch onto. And so there's a concept in law called drawing the sting. If you're going to go out there and you're going to get stung, you might as well just do it when it's your time, when it's your turn. It's like take the medicine and just get it over with. And so that's kind of what's happening here. You can see Prosecutor Binger is having conversations with him, sort of, drawing some of this out. Oh, tell me about the gun that you had. Oh, did you have a permit for that? Was it a concealed carry permit? Was it renewed? What's going on here? And he's going to talk about, maybe I didn't, but they have to get this out right now because if they don't, they're going to look really disingenuous when on cross-examination, Corey Chirafisi comes out and then hammers him over the head with it. So it's sort of, get it out here first so that it takes the sting out of it to some degree. It's called drawing the sting. So let's listen in here. This is Gaige Grosskreutz today, Rittenhouse trial day 6.
Were you armed?
I was.
Tell us about that.
I believe in the Second Amendment. I am for people's right to carry and bear arms. And that night was no different than any other day. It's keys, phone, wallet, gun.
Did you have a permit to carry a concealed weapon?
I did.
Was it in effect on August 25th, 2020?
It was not.
Had it expired?
It had.
And you had not renewed it?
I had not.
Okay, so drawing the sting, have not renewed it. I had it, but oops, it expired. And that's getting the bad facts out there because the defense knows that. And if they don't get that out in front of the jury now, the defense is going to come out here and say, did you have an illegal gun on you? And it's going to look a lot worse than if they just say, yes, we know This is what happened. Very easy explanation here. I just forgot to renew my card. That's all it was. I'm a law-abiding person, other than that other, felony. But anyways, they talked about that at the start of this entire testimony. First question, I think, was, do you have a criminal record? He says, yes, I do. For what? One crime. Move on. Get it out of the way. Just take it right out. Otherwise, if you don't, defense is going to latch onto it. So this is the first question that we get, or the first time that he describes Mr. Grosskreutz about observing Kyle Rittenhouse. When was the first time you saw him? Give us your impression of Rittenhouse. How did you guys cross paths this night? Lay down some foundation here, that is.
Were you armed?
I was.
Tell us about that.
I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm for people's right to carry and bear arms.
Do you remember the first time that you observed the defendant that evening?
I do.
Can you tell us about that?
There was an individual who I had assumed came from the demonstration. The reason I assumed that is because this person was coming from north, traveling southbound. This individual is being supported by two other individuals, kind of like that. If you were to hurt your leg and you needed somebody to help you. I had observed this individual come closer to the car source as the defendant had been essentially offering medical aid. And then that was the first time that I saw the defendant.
Okay, so Kyle Rittenhouse running around, sort of, noticeable, same things that we've heard from some of the other people, kind of stood out a little bit, rendering medical aid. Sounds like a pretty, decent young man running around doing what we have seen other people say he's doing. And this is very interesting, so put a pin in that, because during cross-examination, we're going to hear a different version of this. Here, Thomas Binger said, well, tell us how you noticed the defendant when you first saw him. Well, he was just kind of running around, rendering medical aid, whatever. We're going to hear a different caricature, a different version of reality when we actually see some video evidence of what Grosskreutz really thought. He has some different words he uses to describe what he's seeing when he's talking about Rittenhouse and his crew. So then we start to deal with this interesting narrative that we had not heard thus far. Prosecutor starts to talk to Gaige and says, okay, so you're kind of there, you're rendering aid, you're an EMT, you're out there, ready and willing to just jump in there and support anybody who needs your help. And you're also recording some stuff, and it seems like you notice something interesting that's happening. You're recording some stuff, and you get a wind that the police are going to be moving the protesters around, and they're going to kind of almost drive the protesters like a wedge down into where the militia is, and the militia then is going to deal with them. So the police were almost maneuvering maybe people like Gaige and others of the protesters, non-rioters, of course, down into the militia, and then they'll just, I guess, take care of them, deal with them. Here's what he said today he heard in court.
I want you to try and put yourself back in the frame of that evening when you heard him say something to the effect of, was it, I'm working with the police? Is that right?
Correct.
What was your reaction to that?
I found it odd, and very noteworthy. Previously in the night, an individual I had recorded, Mr. Balch, had described some sort of plan with the police that they were going to essentially push demonstrators south down Sheridan, and then past the car source lot, and then from there we're going to essentially retreat or back up that line. And Mr. Balch had explained that there was some sort of understanding, some sort of plan, to whatever extent that is, but that the police were going to push protesters down past the car source. And he said that then the police told him that it was up to the militia members, as they refer to themselves, to deal with them.
Which is very interesting testimony. I mean, it's not really relevant to the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Kyle Rittenhouse was sort of they tried to lump him into this militia bucket, this caricature of that. We already heard that during the testimony where Binger was trying to get in the video evidence of the person was saying militia, militia, militia in the audio in the background of the video. And we can see how that's sort of weaving itself into the theme of the trial. We hear it again from Gaige. Well, it's kind of the militia is going to deal with them. And that this whole thing was an orchestrated, almost a battle, like the police were going to be maneuvering the troops to maneuver the protesters, like a scene out of Braveheart or something like that. And, you know, again, it doesn't really go to the heart of the matter. Did Kyle Rittenhouse act out of self-defense when he shot you, Gaige? Well, we're going to get to that. But you can see how the framing of the narrative continues. Militia, organized, kind of an us versus a them thing. And again, it's maybe even so nefarious that the police are involved in this. So interesting testimony. Then he goes down and we really start to break down the actual event where Gaige is running down or chasing. We're going to see how much they battle over this word, but chasing Kyle Rittenhouse or running northbound down the street, saying that more people are joining in, whether it's a mob or a crowd or whatever. They're really fighting over semantics here. Not in this clip, but further on the show, but they fight over this. But this is where Thomas Binger is now asking him these questions and saying, hey, can you explain to us, how did this all go down? Again, this is direct examination, Thomas Binger in the Rittenhouse trial today.
After I had turned around and started running in the same direction as the defendant, again, this I wouldn't say that there was more people joining, but more people were then pointing out the defendant, saying that he had just shot somebody, that he's trying to get away, get him, things of that nature. And then so again, further inferencing from the things that I heard and experienced, witnessed earlier in the night, I thought that the defendant was an active shooter.
There it is.
And like I had mentioned earlier, anytime you add a firearm into the equation, like I said, the stakes are so much higher for somebody potentially being seriously injured or being killed.
Can we please?
Okay, so a couple things on this. The active shooter theme finally comes up out of the woodwork. We've been speculating that was going to be where this goes. He's been sort of hinting at that. There it is. I was a medic. I was an EMT. I was there. There was a bunch of chaos that happened. I heard gunshots. I thought there was an active shooter running away from me. So I got my gun and started to chase after him because I was, I guess, going to heal him with bullets or something, right? Stop an active shooter or stop the people or provide medical care, medical aid to the people who need it. So, going to be an actual hero, and lays all of that out one by one. Thomas Binger now is asking him about the gun and about drawing the gun and about whether he was, running if he's an EMT, providing medical aid. Why is he drawing a gun? Why does he have a gun that's not registered or not licensed because it expired? It was, but expired, or his license expired. Why is he, what's happening there? Why does he have a gun if he's an EMT there at a scene? Again, drawing the sting, because the defense is going to ask him about this. So they have to make sure that they get this cleared up during the direct exam. Here is Thomas Binger again.
Before this moment, had you drawn your firearm?
No.
Where was it?
Like I mentioned at the beginning, I keep my pistol holstered in the small of my back.
But don't you have it in your hand at this point?
I can't see.
Okay.
Can't see from this video.
Did there come a time when you were running that you did pull your gun out?
Yes.
Why?
Again, in the moment, I thought that the defendant was an active shooter. Having been not too far behind, like you had mentioned, I'm just about to come into the frame here. I had heard several more gunshots. And again, making inferences, the defendant was the only one with a large caliber rifle.
Which is?
I'd seen an individual jump over the defendant, and then the defendant.
Okay, so it actually, the clip actually cut out right there. We're going to pick it right back up. But did you hear what he said? Right, he's the only person that has a rifle style firearm, or however he phrased it, which obviously was not true. We heard from many other witnesses that a lot of people had firearms of all different varieties, and so we saw that. Oh, hang on a second, we got some loser in the chat I got to deal with. Let's take care of this person here. All right, there we go. So he's talking about drawing a firearm and whether or not. Well, let's pick up the clip. So the clip actually cut out in the middle of this testimony, and so I picked it back up. Let's start it back up right here.
Used a skateboard to hit the defendant, or hold the defendant. Either way, the individual had made contact with the defendant with his skateboard, and then from there, I heard another shot, and then as we can see in this still, an individual, well, yeah.
Okay, so he hears a number of different shots. 1 second. All right. One other second here. Got some knuckleheads in the channel, don't we? All right. So we heard from Gaige. All right. I don't know what's going on in the chat, so I'll deal with that in a minute. But so we heard from Gaige. Gaige is now somebody who has multiple observations about gunshots going off. He thinks it's an active shooter. He is now racing in there to go be a hero, helping away. Let's pick this up. Thomas Binger is now diving in a little bit further. You're pulling your gun out before the shots.
Do you remember specifically, were you intending, when you pulled your gun out, were you intending to use it?
If I had to, I didn't.
All right, 1 second. Making a quick change on the chat. All right. All right. So I've made a quick change. Let's go back to Gaige.
Draw my firearm with express intent of using it, but also being ready if I had to use it.
Okay. Had a firearm, wasn't licensed, but, I'm a medic, and it's really dangerous out there. And so if you need to have a firearm to protect yourself, Gaige, isn't it reasonable that Kyle Rittenhouse might? Isn't it reasonable that other people might? So it's interesting. You sort of have this hypocritical double standard that exists. Thomas Binger comes out and says Rittenhouse, with his firearm, was a reckless lunatic running around the streets of Kenosha. But over here, we get Gaige Grosskreutz, and a firearm is pretty much okay for him. Now, it's not even that big of a deal. So we have more testimony from Gaige, a lot more. Talk about the right hand on the Glock pistol. Where does it actually kind of come down and make a connection? So we know that Gaige is running down the street. He thinks Kyle Rittenhouse is an active shooter. He's going to go provide some help over there. And he doesn't, from Binger's own question, he doesn't have his hand on the gun immediately, but then at some time later down the line, he does, right? He actually, we can see it because he's holding the gun in a lot of the photographs. So when specifically does the gun go on the hand? And this is pretty important because remember what we've talked about previously with self-defense. Self-defense exists when an objectively reasonable person believes that they're in danger of losing their lives or imminent physical injury or something to that effect, but not if you are provoking it. And so we're going to hear in this direct exam sort of this idea that maybe they had already disengaged and maybe Kyle Rittenhouse re-engaged into the conflict, because we're going to hear from that in a minute, basically saying that Rittenhouse already tried to shoot him. And that's why he had to take his gun out, because he was already on the defensive. It's going to make a lot more sense here in a minute, but let's play this next clip.
I did.
Did you witness him fire a shot into Mr. Huber's chest?
I did.
So when you come upon the defendant at this point, do you recall what you were holding in your hands?
I do.
What were you holding?
In my right hand, I had my Glock pistol, and in my left hand, I had my cell phone.
What was going through your mind at this particular moment?
That I was going to die.
Let's continue the video for just a second, please.
Okay, so I was going to die, right? And you probably understand that. Kyle Rittenhouse is sitting there with an not assault rifle. Somebody yelled at me for that. But a rifle that looks like Kyle Rittenhouse's that is obviously warm. It has just been used a couple times, and so certainly you can understand his concerns about that. So now what we get is a play-by-play breakdown. This is where he says something that draws an immediate objection. When I was listening to this earlier in my office, as soon as that question, or as soon as he said this, I was like, objection! I yelled it right out. And of course, Mark Richards or Corey, I forget who it was, they got it as well, and the judge made him rephrase this. But you can see, where this is going, using language that is provocative, really going to be trying to, rile up the jurors and to use his language in a provocative way. Here is Gaige yet again talking about murdering Huber. We're on trial for that. That has not been proven yet. You can't use that word. Here is Gaige.
After Anthony Huber was shot, you can see it in the video, I'm not too far behind him. And the defendant had, after murdering Anthony Huber...
The objection is sustained. That whether the death of Anthony Huber was caused by murder or not is for you jurors to decide and not for the witness. So please keep that in mind. That people, when they're in the court and they're testifying, they can be affected by their emotions, sometimes by their jobs, and they will. For someone who comes into a physician, for example, with a gunshot wound, may be identified as a victim, and that's the language that they speak in the hospital because the person comes in with a gunshot wound. Here in the court, where the issue is yet to be determined whether someone's a victim or not, and it's to be based on the evidence presented in court, and it's a decision to be made by you jurors, not by a witness, not by the judge, not by the prosecutor or the defense attorney. So I'm going to ask you to strike the comment, which was this witness's view of the subject, and because it carries no weight. It's for you folks to decide. Any question about that? Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, so the judge was very nice about that. And you could, look, Gaige knew what he was doing there. Yes, Mr. Prosecutor, that's why Kyle Rittenhouse murdered Huber. He knew what he was doing. But the judge says, well, people can get a little bit, agitated from time to time. People can get animated. Sometimes we use words we don't mean. And then gave the jury a nice explanation. Well, we haven't determined whether Kyle Rittenhouse murdered Huber yet. That's why we're here. So you can't jump to conclusions like he did there. And this is finally sort of this three-part trifecta that really closes up all of the direct testimony. Oftentimes during direct, you sort of want to leave the jury with a bang, right? I mean, kind of in this case, literally. But something that leaves them hanging at the edge of their seats. When you watch, a nice series on Netflix or HBO and it ends, it goes, and that's why I met with Carla. And they go, Carla? And it zooms out and you go, oh, Carla, I remember her from that one scene. I can't believe she did that thing with that guy that one time. And everybody goes, oh, I can't wait to watch the next episode. Kind of something like that. You want to make sure that the jury really gets, hit with something impactful. And so they orchestrated this thing pretty good. There's this three-part trifecta that we're going to go through here. This is Gaige Grosskreutz. He's talking about Kyle Rittenhouse. And let's break this down, right, step by step. He is racing to stop this active shooter. Kyle Rittenhouse has just shot two people. Rosenbaum is dead. We've got Huber is down, probably dead. And we now have Gaige Grosskreutz running up to save the day. Well, he gets there, and Kyle Rittenhouse moves his gun right in front of him, and he is going to detail for us what happens at that exact moment. When those two gentlemen, everything in the universe just stops, and their eyeballs connect. Gaige Grosskreutz is able to look down at Kyle Rittenhouse's gun and see exactly what he does on this thing. And it's a powerful moment in the trial. The jury's going to hear this. Let's break it down. Here is Gaige today.
Continue the video, please. Pause.
Right there, that was the shooting. I blacked it out.
Did you see the defendant do anything with his gun after you put your hands up?
I did.
What did you see him do?
It's an action that's typically referred to as reracking a firearm. So after the defendant had pointed his rifle at me and put my hands up, and then the defendant, like I said, did this motion. It's called reracking, and that's essentially where you take the slide, which on a AR-15 like that would be on the top, and you pull back, and what that does is, depending on if there was already a bullet or a round in the chamber, which would mean it would be ready to fire, as you can put in a magazine, where the bullets are held.
Okay.
And the firearm won't be able to fire, but as soon as you then pull the slide back, like on a pistol or on an AR-15 on the top, that.
Okay, so he starts going off. We're going to pick it back up, but I just want to make a quick moment just to point out what happened here. He is there. He says, when you looked at Kyle Rittenhouse before he shot you, did you see him do anything? He says, yes, I did. I watched him reload the gun. He re-racked the gun, and he basically goes on to explain, a gun's not going to work unless you have ammunition in there, bullets, and if there's something wrong with you eject the shell, re-rack the whole gun, and then it's going to work again. So he starts, kind of spiraling off into that, and then we jump into the next question. So Thomas Binger says, whoa, wait a minute. You're telling me that you went to go and stop this, and not only did he shoot you on a whim, but Kyle Rittenhouse actually reloaded it? That's like adding insult to injury. You got shot, but he was it's like enjoying it, watching you, making eye contact, going, here comes another one. And you raised your hands, didn't you, Gaige, according to Thomas Binger? And so that means that he pulled the trigger when your hands were in the air, didn't he? Today in court. Let's listen.
So after you raised your hands like this, you saw the defendant re-rack the weapon?
Correct.
What did you think was going to happen?
In my experiences and in my inference in that moment, after the defendant had pointed his weapon at me and I had put my hands in the air, re-racking the weapon in my mind meant that the defendant pulled the trigger while my hands were in the air, but the gun didn't fire.
Ooh.
So then by re-racking the weapon, I inferred that the defendant wasn't accepting my surrender.
Did you feel that he was going to point the gun and shoot at you again?
Yes.
What did you do then?
So after the defendant had re-racked his weapon with the rifle still aimed at me, in that moment, I felt that I had to do something to try and prevent myself from being killed or being shot or killed.
All right, so we got to break that down for a minute. So Kyle Rittenhouse, again, we have these two people coming together, locking eyes. Gaige says he sees Rittenhouse reload the gun. Why, though? Why does he have to, recock the gun, re-rack it, as he says? He says, going through his mind, instinctually, it's because Rittenhouse has already tried to shoot him. He moves the gun, fires, doesn't fire, something's wrong, re-racks it so that he can fire again, even though now what we see is Gaige with his hands up. So Gaige now has to act out of self-defense because Kyle Rittenhouse, an active shooter, according to him, was about to kill him. And so he has no choice at this point but to shoot him, but to take his gun. Now Gaige is acting out of self-defense. Now he is having to survive this assaulter, this attacker in Rittenhouse. So he has no choice. He sees the re-rack in real time. He says, uh-oh, he's coming around for another shot. So now I have to start taking my gun and respond back to protect myself. And then they leave it at this. I was never trying to kill him. I was only trying to preserve my own life. That's why I went after Rittenhouse. That's why I put my hand on the gun and had to maneuver it towards his direction. Here they finished this direct exam today in court.
And so I decided that the best course of action would be to close the distance between the defendant and I, and then from there I don't know. I mean, if it meant trying what Anthony had just tried, wrestling the gun, detaining the defendants, I don't know, because I never had an opportunity. I do know, though, I was never trying to kill the defendant. It was never something that I was trying to do. In that moment, I was trying to preserve my own life. But doing so while also taking the life of another is not something that I'm capable or comfortable in doing. That goes against almost a lifelong ethical code that I've lived by in regards to medicine.
Can we back the video up 10 seconds, please?
All right, so they just go through it again and again. There's Kyle. All right, so they go through it a little bit more. They kind of beat that horse into the ground some more. But Gaige Grosskreutz, if you look at everything in a light most favorable to him, right? This is the government's case. It's their direct exam. Let's just take a look at it, give them the benefit of the doubt for a quick second. If Gaige Grosskreutz is true, and everything is looked at in a light most favorable to the prosecution, he's an EMT person. He's somebody who's out there to provide medical treatment, somebody with actual credentials, actual qualifications, somebody who used to be a licensed firearm owner. Okay, it expired, big deal, but he was somebody who was previously licensed, and he was out there trying to stop an active shooter. And if that is a true situation, and he does, in fact, stop an active shooter, that guy's a hero all day. He's on CNN, he's on Fox News, he gets the medal of whatever because he saved lives by stopping an active shooter. So that's what he thinks is going on. We go there, and he is now collapsing upon this active shooter who gets the better of him by having his firearm pointed directly at him after using it on a couple other people. Gaige Grosskreutz is thinking, oh my goodness, this is the end for me. I'm over. I'm done. He puts his hand up. This might be the end of it, he says, but it's not, because Kyle Rittenhouse reinstigates the entire ordeal. He provokes yet a further development of this altercation. He re-racks the gun. Re-racking the gun is a hint to Gaige. This is a trigger to Gaige. He's going to shoot me again. He already tried to shoot me one time, but for whatever reason, the firearm malfunctioned and misjammed, and so he couldn't do it. He's re-racking because he's going to try again. In order to stop him from shooting me, and this time having it work, I have to respond. I have to take my weapon and execute to save my own life. Rittenhouse then shot, and that's the end of that story. And if you're a juror and you look at everything in a light most favorable to Grosskreutz and you say, that's a believable rub there. Seems like a nice guy, credible guy, only wants to prevent people from getting hurt. What do you think? We're going to take your questions from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, and then we're going to jump into the cross-examination with Corey Chirafisi, and we're going to see if there's a little bit of a different story here to this whole Gaige Grosskreutz. So let's see what you have to say from my friends at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Also saw some super chats come in. Husker Mike is confirming for us the bots are out. Got a 14-day ban on Facebook for saying the prosecution better have more. Kyle looks 100% innocent. Keep up the great work, Rob. Well, thanks, Husker Mike. It's everywhere. They're out in hordes today, and we're seeing that, of course, in our YouTube chat. We've got some bots bugging everybody over there. All right, we're waiting for the questions to load up over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Let's see what we have here. Backing up on some of these. I see a lot of questions coming in. Love it. All right. So first one in the house is from Sharon Quidney. Says, I haven't been getting alerts or notifications for a while. Today's the first I've had a message that your show is on. Yeah, it probably has to do with maybe the program change there, Sharon. We're moving a bunch of stuff around. I know it's very frustrating. Let's see. Davis is here. Says, this examination was so emotionally manipulative. How is it relevant that Gaige was one of 10 people to pass the EMT test? How is any of that testimony relevant? I don't think Kyle was thinking about Grosskreutz EMT status. I'm pretty sure he's thinking, holy crap, this guy's running at me with a loaded gun. Weird how Gaige filmed Kyle admitting that he was turning himself in and that he admitted seeing Huber chase Kyle, yet somehow concluded that Kyle was the active shooter. What a mess. Yeah, it was. And he started to use some language about Kyle getting, kind of his head kicked in or at least jumped on during his exam. And you're going, well, sounds like a lot of people were attacking him. We're going to see how badly this goes for the prosecution when we get to the cross-examination. English Dave says, regardless of the evidence and the facts, what chance do you believe Kyle will or won't be found guilty? Do you trust it will be a fair trial and a fair verdict? Yeah, I hope so. I certainly hope so. I think that the evidence is abundantly clear that he is innocent of any of the charges, as far as I can tell. Now, look, if you want to be really, really granular, technically, is he in violation of the curfew charge? Yes, technically. They didn't charge anybody else with that. But, if you wanted to split hairs about that, I think you could. But I certainly don't think that he is guilty of intentional murder or reckless murder or any of those homicide charges at all. And I don't think a jury is going to find him guilty of that. If I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say yesterday, maybe I was, 60, 70% confident. After today, and Gaige is done, I'd say it's probably a 90% if I could. You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to do that. You should never give percentages in law because then people hear that. That's all they hear. Oh, well, you said 90%, Rob. But it's looking pretty good, folks. What we saw today was pretty damn bad. And we'll see how it continues to unfold here in the next segment. Thunder7 says, I just want to say how refreshing and positive it is to have a trial with a judge who actually believes in the law and not a woke lefty activist. Judge may be a bit kooky, but he's on the side of justice, and I appreciate that. That's a fair assessment there. That was from Thunder7. Yeah, a little bit kooky. I think that's a good assessment. Also says, damn, didn't realize you started early. Glad I checked. Well, daylight savings time. We didn't move in Arizona. Anyway, we should we expect murder charges for the defense for murdering Gaige and Binger? Maybe. Yeah, we're going to see that. Maybe, or at least maybe like a domestic abuse type of thing. The court is the house and they got kind of abused. LA Medic says, or Law Medic says, Gaige has a history of being a paramedic but did not have a current license. He stated that he worked in a non-emergency ambulance, not 911. I question when he had a situation he treated a gunshot. One of the first and continuous trainings that are given are scene safety and blood and body substances isolation. For over a year of schooling and training, those are two things that are drilled into you as the first two things in every scene. A medic cannot help anyone if they are injured. His actions are in direct conflict of that training. The only medic that have a firearm and active shooter training are SWAT medics that have both medic certification and have gone through a police academy. Yeah, that's from La Medic. Yeah, I think that he was throwing around a lot of the qualifications, but wasn't all that highly qualified. It was just a convenient little, kind of excuse. La Medic says, the drone footage is new to the prosecution and my case to my understanding. They said that they are attempting to have the footage analyzed and blown up. Is there any time limit for new evidence to be added to the record? This is 18 months later. How could this not have come our way before? Any chance that this is a prosecution play in their crappy case? Yeah, so there are all sorts of discovery rules that exist. I don't know exactly what they are in Wisconsin, but certainly the day of trial is generally too late to release new disclosures, just to come out and say, oh, we found the murder knife, the day of trial. Well, we should have found it a long time before that because the defense needs their time to go and investigate all of the claims. You can't just bring in a new witness. We got a brand new witness here today who's going to prove our case and incriminate the defense to the moon. Okay, well, The defense needs to prepare their defense. And so you don't get to just, it's not a surprise party day in court. So the same thing happens when we're talking about new evidence. Now, this drone footage, if it is something that is, moderately relevant to stuff we've already talked about, and the defense doesn't object to it, if the defense says, yeah, no problem, bring it in, we don't care, then that may not be a big deal. It can just come right in, even though it may be in technical violation of some of the rules. I saw Beth Coddington in here with a monster super chat. Shout out to Beth Coddington, who's back with us. Says, what a fantastic monthly meeting on Saturday, Robert. So glad I was able to make it. Finally getting back to normal relatively. Love you all. Thanks for all that you do. I forgot to mention that at the start of the show. Yeah, at our watchingthewatchers.locals.com monthly meetup, we met for like 3 hours, and it was a blast. I had a ton of fun. Beth Coddington was there, all bundled up, snuggled up over there, warm as can be. And it's a lot of fun to put names to faces and see everybody and see what they're doing. And Beth gave us a very nice update about kind of what's going on in her life. And so all of our love goes out to Beth and everybody else who was able to join us. We had probably about 40, 50, maybe up to 60 people at one time, all on Zoom. And we got to see where everybody was from. And some people are outside. Some people are, kind of in their, big rigs, driving all over the country. It's cool. It's fun to see where people come from. And it's a good community that we're building over there. So come check us out. Monster1 says, I watched most of the day on Nick's channel. Oh, shout out to Nick, by the way. I was on his channel yesterday, very late. If you want to watch my brain malfunction a few times, go check out my interview with Nick last night. It was late. I'm normally in bed by like 9:30. But we had fun, man. We streamed for almost 2.5 hours, I think. Had a lot of fun. I'm going to invite him onto our channel. Love what he's doing, man. He is up to speed on this case. So he says, I watched most of it over there. Like when Gaige says it was his understanding that Kyle wasn't experienced in first aid, how could he possibly know that? He doesn't. He didn't know Kyle and had very little interaction with him, so how could he give accurate testimony? He couldn't. Is this a strategy on the defense part? Is the prosecution killing their own case so bad that the defense doesn't need to object, or is that negligence on the defense? I just think it's a stylistic thing. They're just kind of giving them a lot of leeway, a lot of rope. Say whatever you want. They don't necessarily need to object to things unless it's really objection worthy. Think about the other problem with objections sometimes is that jurors can think that you're trying to hide things from them. If you're objecting at every question, it's like, can you just let him talk? We want to hear what he has to say. Stop objecting and ruining the flow. And so if you get objection happy, it can really almost be as annoying as kind of not objecting to improper questions. So it's a stylistic thing. I don't think it would be negligent. Of course, if they don't win, then there's going to be a lot of conversations about that. Snipers here says Grossarm completely destroys his own testimony when he says he would never shoot anyone. If that is the case, why is he involving himself in an active shooter situation if he wasn't willing to use lethal force to stop the active threat? It's a good point there. That was from Sniper. Let's jump back over to YouTube and see what we've got. Eddie Oliver said, Rob, is it too soon to pass a law establishing a holiday for Gaige Grosskreutz? The guy is a hero. Also, you'd beat Ricada in a knife fight. Well, that's very nice of you to say that. Yeah, hopefully we never have to test that out. Nick seems scrappy as hell. Don't judge him. Don't judge that battle too quickly. But it's good to see you, Eddie. Eddie was over there with us a lot yesterday as well. And that was from Husker Mike. Iceman said, large caliber. That was said several times, and caliber speaks directly to the bullet diameter. The 22 caliber bullet, smaller than what's in his Glock. Those are great questions. Andrew says, I don't think I've ever seen a DA put on self-forever sleep watch on television live until today. We're going to watch some of that. We have an actual facepalm in our next segment. And then Peter says, directed verdict, prosecutorial misconduct. The directed verdict conversation, Nick and I talked a lot about that yesterday. And I was like a 0% on that. But now, even after today, it might be closer to something that maybe actually possible happening. Vientica says, oh, look, another corporate media narrative getting smashed. How many are we at the recent couple of years now? A lot of these. Did you see Anna Kasparian? Nate, the lawyer, posted this on his Twitter timeline. He said that Anna Kasparian was somebody who over at the Young Turks, and she has been promoting this brought weapons across state lines hoax for, a year now. And kind of having to eat her words a little bit over there. We've got Geomancy says, hey, Rob, do you need a mod to ban these spammers in the chat? Where can I sign up? I think we do now. I think we're sort of at that point. We do, Geomancy. May reach out to you about that. Law Medic says, also, as a paramedic, you have to be under the umbrella of an MD, a medical director, to do any other medical treatment other than basic care, what a bystander would do. If I was to treat someone while not under that, I would have no liability coverage under the law. Got some good medical knowledge coming in here from Law Medic. D. Delsby says, thoughts on Gaige and his tweeting about the trial and that being used as evidence against him? Not really against him, but to show that he's commenting on the active case. So I saw some of that briefly, D. Delsby, and shout out to D. Delsby, who is with us over on our locals meetup. We did see that, right? I think there was indication that Gaige was actually commenting on, I think, Jack Posobiec's Twitter account. And I think he was, somebody else was commenting on it, but he's actually on Twitter. Allegedly, it is actually Gaige Grosskreutz. And he was posting, I think, back on November 1st, like recently, like as this trial is warming up. And so, I don't think anything there is going to be stuff that's going to, shatter the case or be earth-shattering or anything like that. But I do think that, he is going to be impeached and embarrassed pretty badly, I think, here soon. We're going to go into the next segment talking about cross-examination, but what we're going to see is that Corey Chirafisi, at least on one occasion, asked him a question about somebody else who's going to come in and testify soon. And so if Grosskreutz's answer is not matching to what this other person who comes in and testifies, it's going to look like he is massively lacking in credibility. So any of those tweets or any of those other external statements, if you can bring those back into court, if he comes out here and says, yeah, I did say that I wanted to make sure that I emptied an entire clip into Rittenhouse, yeah, obviously that's going to be problematic. Don't expect him to say anything like that. But yeah, if he's sort of, opening the door to anything, you could recall him as a witness. You could ask him about those things. I think the judge would entertain that. The judge has already sort of scolded the media previously. And so if stuff is, bubbling up in the middle of the trial, I think the judge very well may call him back in and ask, or allow questions to be asked about those things. Whether they're consequential, though, is a whole nother matter. We've got David Orndorff says, isn't the discussion of whether or not Grosskreutz thought his life was in danger completely irrelevant? Both him and Kyle can think their lives are in danger and have a reasonable argument for self-defense. Yeah, it's relevant for, it's sort of a battle of the self-defenses right now. And he's trying to reclaim that with this whole narrative. That I was the person who was actually doing the good thing. Kyle Rittenhouse was the bad guy. Rittenhouse, I'm the good guy. You were the bad guy. So you've got these competing self-defense claims, and it's going to be up to the jury to decide which one wins. And a lot of this is going to come down to credibility and the other facts of the case, which we're going to get into, because Corey Chirafisi really kind of beats up this this heroic medic EMT going in to save a bunch of lives. That all sort of changes pretty rapidly. Good to see you, David. Good question. A couple others before we jump back into it. PWS MKAZ says Gaige got caught up in his lies, plus destroys his own lawsuits. Yeah, he had a pretty bad day today. We're going to talk about those lawsuits. News Now Wyoming says, how much does it matter that the victim thought he was stopping someone who was involved in an active shooter versus Rittenhouse's perception that he was acting in self-defense and there was a person with a gun approaching him? So it matters. It matters to the degree that you have to decide whether Kyle Rittenhouse himself was justified. Remember that Gaige Grosskreutz is not on trial here. So we're not asking about whether Gaige Grosskreutz is entitled to the protection of self-defense. You can play around with that mechanically in your brain. You could compare and contrast. You could say, okay, these two people, they rammed into each other in the middle of a hypothetical, in the middle of, Bumsville, wherever. And it is now a nice intellectual conversation about who really has self-defense in a situation like that. But what we have here legally for the facts of this case, Kyle Rittenhouse has been charged with intentional homicide. So self-defense needs to be proven for him. And if he can invoke that, then he's immune from criminal liability as to Gaige Grosskreutz. So I know that a lot of people want to make this an either or thing. Well, either he had self-defense or he had self-defense. What we're talking about is in context of Kyle Rittenhouse being charged. He has to invoke that affirmatively and communicate that he's entitled to that privilege. And if he is, then the criminal liability as to Grosskreutz evaporates. So I know that's not really a satisfactory answer, because you want to know how the two relate to one another. But if Grosskreutz was being charged with a crime, then the self-defense doctrine would apply to him. Right? It's not, you can't have both people with self-defense. Right? One person is sort of the aggressor as to the other person. So one person is going to get charged, and then one person is going to invoke self-defense. So it can get very complicated. You can dive into, sort of imperfect self-defense and all these mistakes of facts and, different intent, and it can get very complicated. But by and large, broad strokes, Rittenhouse has the defense privilege. We have to make sure that it applies to him vis-a-vis the other victims who are part of the case. Good question, News Now. That's some heavy legal stuff. Also says, I have my CCW permit. Even though I live in a state I don't need it, I keep it current so I can travel to 42 states, honor my CCW. I can't buy the excuse of it just expired, I forgot it. He knowingly withheld from police and his lawsuit that he was carrying a gun illegally. No matter how much he may try to say it wasn't purposeful, he withheld very important information. And he absolutely did. And we're going to get into a lot of that here in the next segment. And it may be a good time to jump into that. So let's go ahead and do that, because a lot of the questions are sort of relevant to the cross-examination by Corey Chirafisi. It's Kyle Rittenhouse trial, day 6. We just finished talking about the Gaige Grosskreutz direct examination. That's where the government is asking the questions. It's sort of a friendly witness. Now we're picking back up with the cross-examination. So now Thomas Binger here has finished his his direct examination of Gaige Grosskreutz, and we're going to listen in as he is cross-examined by defense attorney Corey Chirafisi. Corey Chirafisi, of course, representing Kyle Rittenhouse, and he started off the cross-examination by really digging into Gaige about these lawsuits, which is the first time I heard about these bad boys. But apparently, he's got a couple of them. Maybe one, maybe two. I'm not so sure of it. Regardless, at least one is asking for $10 million. So he says that he was injured as a result of this entire ordeal in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he's entitled to compensation. And so this is Corey asking him a little bit about that. Hey, you filed a notice of claims, got your name on it. You want to tell us a little bit more about that there, Gaige? Corey Chirafisi, right here in court.
That is correct.
Okay. And this is, so to be fair, this is your testimony today, and how this case turns out has an impact on your ability to try to collect your $10 million, right?
That is correct.
So if he's convicted, if Mr. Rittenhouse is convicted, your chance of getting $10 million is better, right?
I'm not entirely sure how that plays out.
Haven't had any conversations with your lawyer about
Well,
that?
you're not going to ask about conversations with his lawyer.
Okay, fair enough. You're aware that if Mr. Rittenhouse is convicted, your chances of getting the $10 million are better?
I'm not objecting, Your Honor. This has been asked and answered, and I don't think he's got a basis to answer that.
Judge, I would
Well,
move-
I sustain on the first ground.
I would move 63.
Objection?
No.
Received.
All right, so submitting the document, submitting the actual lawsuit, $10 million, also goes through, your lawyer's in the courtroom too, right? And she was here this morning, and she's right back there. All right. And she files civil claims, and we're going to get into a lot more of this when we get into the last segment of the show today, because we hear from the detective, and he tells us a lot about the conversations with Gaige and his lawyer, and as it pertains to regaining access to the cell phone and, interviews and things like that. So we now are going to jump into another question from Corey Chirafisi, saying yet again that your $10 million, that's kind of a big payday. It's kind of contingent upon what happens here in this courtroom. Might that be a conflict of interest or bias your testimony? Here he is.
Anybody need a medic, right?
Correct.
Okay. Natalie, go ahead.
On our own, medics. You're good. You can go home. Fucking stupid.
And that's you, right?
Speaking?
Yeah.
That is correct.
So you say you can go home, you fucking stooge. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, that was another clip. So, sort of reverting this back now, we see that Gaige is portraying a different aura about himself. During his direct examination, he was just this EMT. He was just this nice guy who was running around the streets of Kenosha, trying to help people. And he wanted to stop an active shooter. But then when the defense comes out and plays a video, and you just heard that there, content warning, a little late on that one, sorry. He says, Mr. Grosskreutz, it sounds like you were out there running around filming people, calling them effing stooges. Was that you? Yes, it was. Oh. So you weren't out there actually, trying to maybe help Kyle Rittenhouse, somebody who was running around being an EMT style person. You weren't supporting him. You were kind of needling him to some degree, calling him an effing stooge. Oh, so that's a little bit of a different version of this. Here is Corey Chirafisi digging in on that again.
Got her own medics. You're good. You can go home.
Fucking stupid. And that's you, right?
Speaking?
Yeah.
That is correct.
So you say you can go home, you fucking stooge. Right?
Correct.
Okay. He didn't do anything to you, did he?
No.
You didn't see him threaten anyone, did you?
No, I did not.
You didn't see him act aggressive toward anyone, did you?
No, I did not.
In fact, again, whether you agree that he's a medic or not, he's asking people if they need help. Agreed?
That is correct.
Okay.
Kyle didn't do anything at all. He just didn't like how he looked or how he was running around. He didn't like the fact that he was, playing EMT. And so he's instigating with them. Corey Chirafisi starts back up, says, let's go back out now. If you are somebody who thinks that there was an active shooter, how do you rectify the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse, when you came upon him on the street that night, told you a bunch of stuff, said that he was going to be actually going to the police and he was in fact running that direction? How do you justify that? Here's what Gaige Grosskreutz said today in court.
You've probably watched videos, you've probably seen all this. I'm asking you to put yourself back there at that time, okay? You know shots are fired, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the only information that you have is Mr. Rittenhouse saying, according to you, he pulled the gun on me first, right?
Correct.
And based on that, you believe there's an active shooter.
Not solely on that, but yes.
You don't have any information, correct?
I had minimal information.
And in fact, what he says to you was, I'm going to the police, correct?
That is correct.
And he's running toward the police, isn't he?
That is correct.
Okay. So and tell me if this is right. You have no idea what happened with Mr. Rosenbaum, do you?
Apart from, no. No.
On that day.
Correct.
Okay. And he tells you he's running, and he tells you whatever he tells you, I'm going to the police, or what you think is, he pulled the gun first, and he's running away from you, right? He's running north on Sheridan Road. Yes?
Correct.
And he's running away from where you're standing. True?
Yes, he's running away. So what he's trying to do here is establish different indicia. So let's remove Gaige Grosskreutz from the entire situation. Let's say that we have just a situation in general where you have one person, a hypothetical not related to Kenosha at all. One person is running down the street. The only thing we know about this person has a firearm, has a weapon around their chest, also is somebody that says, I'm going towards the police, and looks like they're running towards the police. We heard gunshots, didn't see any of that really specifically. Saw somebody running. He's communicated to them, I didn't shoot anybody, or says something like that. There was a shooting, but I'm going to the police. That's all you know. And so what do you do about what do you do? A reasonable person, right? That's all you know about this person. You see what he looks like. Do you think that person's an active shooter? Do you pull out your firearm to go and chase them down and shoot and to maybe shoot them? just based on those facts alone. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. This guy certainly did. But on that basis alone, does that justify you to use deadly force against that person in and of itself based off those facts? Of course not, right? Because you're not in danger, you're not in harm. It's all speculative. As he admits right here, it's minimal information. He doesn't know much at all. He doesn't know anything about what happened with the prior shootings. There were gunshots that were going off all night long. First gunshot in the entire sequence never even came from Rittenhouse. It came from 2 other people who were nearby. There were shootings taking place at it was a war zone, as Officer Pep told us yesterday. So what we see here is this conversation about he just doesn't know enough to go and follow Rittenhouse and chase him with a gun. And then he shows him that before he even got to Rittenhouse, he was already pulling the firearm back out from under his shirt. We can see this image right here. He points himself out in court today, and we know that the gun was concealed in the back of his pants, right on his belt, and that's an image from somebody else streaming that Corey Chirafisi showed in court today. It says, look, Kyle Rittenhouse is running further down the street, and the mob, the protesters, the rioters, whatever you want to call them, they are all now encroaching upon him, sort of crashing in. And you can see it clean as day. So the next question, the next thought process is, what happens? Why is Grosskreutz have his hand on that if he's just on his firearm, if all he's doing is just going to go down there and, render medical aid? Sounds a little bit suspicious. So in our next clip then, we get Corey Chirafisi, who is now talking about the jump kick man. So this is, again, the government's witness who is walking us through play by play the slow sort of assault on Kyle Rittenhouse. We now have jump kick man who's flying through the air attacking Kyle. And Grosskreutz is further back in the chain of people who are assaulting, who are crashing down upon Kyle. He's back here. The flying ninja kick man is somewhere ahead of him. So he's going to watch all of that unfold right in front of his eyes. Here he is, Corey Chirafisi in court today.
You were concerned for Kyle Rittenhouse's safety.
Yes, I was.
You were concerned because you saw, and I'm going to refer to him as the only way we referred to him, jump kick man. So you see this guy kick him in the face. True?
I do not see jump kick man kick him in the face.
You see him attempt to kick him in the face?
From my perspective, I didn't see any specific motion regarding kicking, but it is fair to say that I did observe jump kick man going over the defendant.
Over the defendant. Of course, not anything that was an attack or an assault or anything like that. He was just jumping right over him, just a peaceful little jump, and not even a big deal. So they're sort of arguing about semantics here. It's back and forth. It's a kick in the face. It's a flying ninja kick, but not really. And so they're just battling it out about the semantics. But the jurors know what happened. Anytime a witness does this, it's kind of obvious. If a juror sees a witness getting squirrely, fighting over falling forward or lunging or whatever, it starts to become a little bit of an annoyance for the jurors, and they get it. So let's take a look back now at the original statement that Gaige Grosskreutz gave to the police. And so we're going to play this. This is Corey Chirafisi
now, your original
today
statement
talking about
then
it.
To the police.
Let me take care of this person in the chat. There it is.
I tried telling the guy to stop hitting him with the skateboard. The guy on the ground then turned over, racked the weapon, and pointed his gun at me and shot me, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. You omitted the fact that you ran up on him and had a Glock pistol in your hand, right? You left that out.
Correct.
Would you think in a case where you are shot that providing the police information that you were possessing a firearm at the time would be relevant?
I think that's fair, yes.
Okay. But you didn't think it was relevant to tell him that day, correct?
No, he didn't. And so we're going to see what happens here. This is a very interesting little exchange back and forth between these two. So you see what's happening, right? Corey Chirafisi is saying, you left out something pretty important. There was actually a firearm that you had when the entire incident went down. There was a shooting that took place. You were running at somebody with a firearm in your hands. You got shot. Police showed up at the hospital. They had a conversation with you. What's your story? What happened, Gaige? Tell them everything that happens, except don't mention there's a firearm in a shooting that went down. Kind of a pretty important little caveat there. A little slight omission that might have been worth communicating, especially when people got shot. Multiple people. So they're going to have to recreate that. He doesn't think about it. And so if you're watching this at home, you're watching, ooh, get him, Corey. He is really digging in here, and he's going to get him to sort of, this big reveal. You lied, didn't you, Gaige? You omitted this because you had a nefarious purpose for making sure the police didn't know that you had a gun, because maybe that might implicate you. So people are watching and going, yeah, get him, Corey. And what Gaige does here is very, very clever. And watch what Corey allows him to do. Just lets him go on. Gaige says, there's a good reason why that was omitted. Here's his explanation. And Corey just lets him go. Watch.
But you didn't think it was relevant to tell him that day, correct?
It's not that I didn't think it wasn't relevant. After the defendant had shot me, I had just gotten out of surgery when the Kenosha police officers had arrived and just gone through one of the most traumatic experiences in my life, both emotionally and physically. I'd just gotten out of surgery. I had just been sedated. I was on pain meds. So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It wouldn't have been a purposeful omission.
You were asked at that same statement what you did for work, and you refused to answer that, right?
That is correct.
So you made a conscious decision to not answer that.
That is correct.
You weren't so drugged that you couldn't answer that question, right?
I refused because I was worried for my safety.
My point is that you had...
Okay, so you see what he did there. He was just about to get blown out. Corey was just about to call him a liar. You didn't disclose any of this to law enforcement. They came to the hospital. They asked you questions, and you were dishonest about it. You omitted it. And he was ready for that one. To his credit, he says, yeah, well, that's because I had my arm blown off after your defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse, shot it off illegally. And you go, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, if you have your bicep blown off into smithereens, maybe you're not thinking clearly, are you? But Corey says, oh, go ahead, keep going. And he let him go. And Gaige goes on and says specifically, a lot of pain, a lot of medication, a lot of drugs. That's the reason why that omission happened. And you say, well, that makes sense. You were drugged up. You were all under the weather there. And he just let him go. Go ahead. Okay. But that's weird, though, because your answers to the other questions seemed like they were kind of on point. You didn't talk about your work. Why not? Because you were afraid. You didn't answer these other questions. Why not? You were thinking about it. And it's very interesting that you got the answers right to all the other questions, minus the gun stuff. And Corey doesn't let him get away with it. This was very nicely done cross-examination today in court.
My point is that you had a thoughtful process not to answer that. True?
That is correct.
You told this officer specifically what Mr. Rittenhouse was wearing, correct?
That is correct.
You had a thoughtful process, even though you just got out of surgery and were drugged and whatever else was going on, which I understand. You were still able to answer all those questions to the best of your ability, and they were accurate, right?
To the best of my ability, yes.
Yep.
Okay. So the fact that you failed to mention that you possessed a firearm when you were shot and that you dropped it, were those things that you forgot because of your medication?
I would say not only the medication, but also the traumatic experience that I'd just gone through.
And you understand it's the only information that you appeared to have forgotten that puts you with a gun directly in front of him, right?
That is correct.
Let it linger. Let it stay. Don't ask anything. Let it sit there.
Now,
Yes, just let it sit there. You let that meatball just sit there. Oh, yeah, it's good. And Corey Chirafisi, just let it hang there. Here you go. Here's a big, fat, stinking meatball for you, buddy boy. What do you think about that? It was really well done. Yeah, yes, very traumatic. A lot of drugs. Got it. Very convenient, though. The only information you left out gave you a gun right in front of Kyle Rittenhouse. Very curious how that happened. Very, very convenient. And then he just let that matzo ball hang out there all night long. And so another very interesting thing happened today. Remember this guy, Jacob Marshall? Heard that name sort of bandied about. Apparently, one of Gaige Grosskreutz's roommates, or a former roommate, somebody that Gaige spent some time with. Haven't heard from him in this trial yet, but it sounds like we might. And we're going to hear about Gaige Grosskreutz not having any regrets about anything that happened that night, including anything that he talked about while he was laid up in the hospital. Because this roommate, Jacob Marshall, apparently went over to the hospital and had a conversation with him and said, Gaige, brother, you just got your arm shot off. What do you have to say about that? Gaige had some choice words about what he thinks maybe he should have done differently. So let's take a look. We have Corey asking Gaige, do you have any regrets about what happened there? Let's check in. I'm going to fast forward through a bunch of this stuff.
Is the KF
you'd agree that the statement that I had previously showed you that you had given the police on the 26th, is that right?
Yes. So on this document, it's marked 2520. I don't know if that's reference to the time of the incident, but
Right.
this statement was given. It looks like 900. I'm sorry, 9:46 a.m. of
Okay.
the following day.
So just so we're clear, it says on 8/25/20 at 11:30 p.m. this happened, right?
Correct.
Okay. So the only thing I want to make sure that you're comfortable saying is there's markings at various points on this paper. Is that right?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And the statement is 2 pages. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And can you tell me what those marks are on the left-hand side of that document?
All right. So what we ultimately end up getting into is something that looks exactly like this. So Jacob Marshall is somebody who posted this on Facebook, it looks like, says, Ben Stuckless. So the kid shot Gaige as he drew his weapon, and Gaige retreated with his gun in his hand. I just talked to Gaige Grosskreutz. 2, his only regret was not killing the kid and hesitating to pull the gun before emptying the entire mag into him. Coward. We get a little bit of a like button over here. So they were setting up this foundation, Corey Chirafisi, going through all these records, all these documents. That was posted up on Facebook. And we need to dig into that because what happened here is Jacob Marshall says that I just talked to Gaige 25 minutes after that was posted. We know that there was some record that Jacob went and visited you, Gaige, in the hospital. When he was there in the hospital, did he talk to you about this? And did you say that? Did you say that you really wanted to empty your entire magazine into Rittenhouse? What do you have to say for yourself here, Gaige?
If you had any regrets about that evening and that you had said that you did not, correct?
Correct.
Now, I had asked you if you know a person, Jacob Marshall, correct?
Yes.
And Jacob Marshall may not be today, but he was your roommate.
Yes.
And you had said that he had visited you in the hospital.
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what is marked as Exhibit 70. I'm not interested in the stuff on the right now. I'm just interested in the photograph. Okay? Is that a photograph of you and Mr. Marshall?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Does that appear to be taken after you had suffered the injury to your arm?
Yes.
Okay. And that's at a hospital. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you had said you didn't have any regrets. Did you tell Mr. Marshall that your only regret was not killing the kid and hesitating to pull the gun before emptying the entire mag into him?
No, I never said that.
You didn't tell that to your roommate.
Objection, asked and answered.
You didn't tell that to Mr. Marshall?
No, I did not.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's it, right? You heard that question. That's it. You didn't tell him that? You didn't post that? You didn't say anything to him, Jacob Marshall, about wanting to empty your entire magazine in there? Well, if we call Jacob Marshall up to the stand, is he going to confirm that there, Gaige? You know, he was a roommate of yours, but, you know, sometimes roommates end with a bad split. We know how that goes sometimes. You know, if you ever live with anybody, it's kind of a nice thing to throw them out of the house because they always leave their dishes in the sink. It's annoying. So we now know that he never said that. Gaige Grosskreutz says, not going to allow that. You know, I never said anything like that. He looked at the jury and I never had sexual relations with that witness. We're going to see, because Julio Rosas, who was down there at the trial, came out and told us that the judge is looking for Jacob Marshall. The defense noted that Jacob Marshall, who posted on Facebook about Grosskreutz wanting to empty the, quote, entire mag into Rittenhouse, was in the courtroom. But now he's gone after being served a subpoena. Judge says they need to find out where Marshall is. Defense said Marshall is scheduled to testify on Wednesday. Okay, so that little statement from Gaige, I never said that. Guess what? Jacob Marshall is going to be in court in 2 days. And guess what question is going to be asked of him? Did Gaige Grosskreutz say anything about Kyle Rittenhouse? And if so, what was it? And we're going to see what he has to say about it on Wednesday. Now, this is the final real clip here that came out of Gaige Grosskreutz testimony today. This is basically the worst, the worst thing that he could have essentially said here. And he's talking about the sequence of events about who sort of did what when with their guns. Did Kyle Rittenhouse shoot him while his hands were up, like Thomas Binger said was the case? Oh, your hands were up and he just shot you, didn't he? Yes, he did. Was that the case? Because when you really sort of tease that out, when you pull out the meatballs from the meat sauce and you separate everything out, looks like a little bit of a different thing happened. Let's take a quick look and see what he had to say about the shooting and about when Kyle pulled his gun out. Here is Gaige Grosskreutz today. Rittenhouse trial, day 6.
When you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Whoa. Whoa. Let it sit there. And they do. He just lets it hang there. So let's break that down 1 quick minute. He goes back and he says specifically, so Rittenhouse didn't actually pull the trigger until you already started to point your gun his direction. So when your hands were like this, Rittenhouse didn't shoot. But when you started to move your gun, then he shot. And that almost matches identically what Gaige was telling us about. He came up to the scene. Rittenhouse, according to his own testimony, re-racked it. Remember that? And then Gaige said specifically, I knew I had to act. I saw him re-rack it. I decided my life was about to be over, so I pointed the gun towards him. I was actually going to engage with him. Boom, that's when Kyle Rittenhouse shoots. Which is about as obvious of self-defense as you can get. He pointed the gun. Kyle Rittenhouse was waiting. Hands were up. No bullet left the gun. Soon as the hand came down, fires and shoots him in the arm, no less, right? Doesn't kill him. And that matches Gaige's testimony almost exactly. He walked up to Kyle. There was a brief moment. Kyle re-racks. He didn't tell us that at that moment he pointed the gun, but we got that out of him when Corey Chirafisi dug into him on the cross. And folks, it's not just, me who's making a big deal out of this statement. Take a look at the court clerk. This is what she looked like as soon as she heard that. Okay, she looks her attention over to the prosecutor going, huh? What? What did he just say? because she knows it's not going good for them. And then if you look over immediately to the prosecutor's table, they're not looking too hot either. We got James Krause over there, has his hand buried, his head buried in his hand like a literal facepalm. Binger's over here just going, oh, God, oh, no, this is the worst. And so now that you see these two people, watch this. Watch the court clerk. She literally stumbles up, her shocked up. And then we see, and watch the cameraman. It's going to go over to James Krause, the assistant prosecutor, and as soon as he sees his hands buried in his head buried in his hands, the camera then moves away. Let's watch this one more time. Here it is.
When you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Watch the reporter. Court reporter, watch. Huh? Now what? Wait for it. Watch a gulp. Here comes a gulp. Gulp. There it is. Kyle Rittenhouse is doing okay. And then the facepalm. Here comes the facepalm. Wait for it.
You had...
There it is. Oh, no.
Now you had mentioned that you...
Now watch Corey. Now look, he grabs his magic wand. Look at this. He grabs his magic wand, and he's got his glasses up on his forehead, and he's got this little grin on his face with his little magic wand, his little pointer stick, walking back over to the podium for his next line of questioning. He knows what just happened there. Well done. Really well done, Corey Chirafisi. Amazing. Amazing that he got that out of Gaige Grosskreutz. Woo! He's got the magic wand. Going to celebrate it. Got that little smirk. Oh, yeah, it's pretty good there, huh? How about that cross-exam? Not too bad, huh? All right, so let's take a look at your questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And I see we also got some super chats that have come in. I think a couple of those. Yeah, that was from Beth. Good to see you, Beth. That was from Eddie. Valentino says, it was my tweet with a screenshot of him aiming at Kyle's head that he responded to. I couldn't believe he tweeted before his testimony. Inadvisable. Wow, no kidding. So Valentino was somebody who Gaige actually responded to. So it sounds like you control Gaige Grosskreutz out there. I mean, he's actually responding to people on Twitter. He was calling people soy boys and stuff like that. Very, very angry man. Very aggressive fella. He just needs to take it easy, especially in the middle of trial. Don't get on Twitter and start trolling people on there. It's not a good look. That was a good comment. Erica B says, if Kyle is acquitted, that makes Grosskreutz de facto liable for assault. Will Gaige be brought up on criminal charges if Kyle is acquitted? And the answer is no. Right? What happens here is prosecutors have some discretion about who to charge, and they can't go this entire trial calling Gaige Grosskreutz a victim, somebody who was assaulted and almost murdered by Kyle Rittenhouse, and then turn around and then say, just kidding, now you're a criminal. Now you're somebody who is the assailant. They're not going to do that. They're going to, if they lose their case, they're going to stay by their original decisions. They're just going to chalk it up as a loss, but they're not going to refile charges any other direction. We had a couple others before we jump over to locals. We've got Patrick Waubin says, if Kyle is found not guilty and the case gets dismissed, does that create any necessity open to Gaige to criminal charges? Very similar question. I think I answered that. Or only civil lawsuits from Kyle? Yeah, again, he certainly could be sued, but does he have any assets? Probably not. So I'm not sure that would make any sense for Kyle, because before you sue somebody, you want to make sure that you can recover. Iceman says, how damaging is the insinuation that Kyle pulled the trigger while Grosskreuz's hands were up, and how can the defense dispute it? Well, I think we just discovered that. We just saw how Corey Chirafisi did it. Yeah, his hands were up, but then he started to shoot, to move again, and that's the moment that Kyle Rittenhouse actually pulled the trigger. Grosskreutz even admitted it. Seth Kaiser says, if Kyle is found not guilty, a defamation case against him for any of the complaining parties, maybe, I'm not really up to speed in that area of law, but I know people like Nick Sandman, right? They filed some of these claims. I don't know if they won anything. I was talking to Nick Rekieta about that yesterday on his show. And he sort of is more closely aligned on the pulse over there about what's happening with some of those types of defamation claims against some of the bigger media companies. But I don't know. I think certainly he could. You've got a lot of people who've been saying that he did something that I never thought he did. We'll see. I'm sure somebody will take that case for him. That was from Seth. Zulu's here, says, please wrench someone. Anyone will do. Probably talking about all those trolls in the chat. That's Zulu in the house. Shout out. Good to see you, Zulu. And let's see. We've got another one from Jay. Says, great job, Robert, with a very nice donation. Thank you, Jay. Certainly appreciate that. Bianca says, couldn't Kyle and the defense have gotten up and yelled, yes, when the gross witness said he only shot after being approached with a gun? Couldn't they? They could have, yeah. They could have. They're going to save that for outside the courtroom. They're going to go outside, and they're going to high-five each other, certainly tonight. Rittenhouse got a new haircut, too. Let's see. Jumping back over to locals. Let's see here. Someone says, Gaige is spinning a web. Major says, spoiler alert, liar, liar, pants on fire. This guy should be charged with attempted murder. He has 10 million reasons to get Kyle convicted. It's true. He has a lot. Let's see what else we have. Major says, why doesn't the defense ask why the witness medic did not pursue looking for wounded person before chasing after Kyle, who was not shot, if that was his purpose for being there? It's a good question, Major, and I think that would have been a very appropriate question to ask. Maybe it did come up. I'm not sure if it did or not. Trowpat says, the best decision Richards has made during this entire trial is to let the hitman cross-examine everyone. I hope that he delivers closings as well. Yeah, you kind of have that. You have somebody who's really good at cross, and you turn them loose on the opponents. Monster One says, this is what I was saying earlier. Gaige isn't a firearms expert. Why is the defense not objecting? When the gun forensic expert was testifying, why didn't they ask her if they found an unfired round? If he re-racked there, should be an unfired bullet. If is their argument that they found every spend, why not the unspent bullet? Yeah, so that's a good question there, Monster One. And I'm not sure if they dug into that today at all. Probably not, if you're saying they didn't. But what Monster One is saying is that when Kyle allegedly re-racked the gun, the non-fired round, or the round that has a problem, if there's a jam in the weapon or whatever, you pop that out, you reset it so it's ready again. Why didn't they find that additional bullet? I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. Couple more. Let's see. Ghost Gunner says, it's not re-racking when it's a rifle. That's only for a pistol that has a slide. It's called a charging handle on an AR-15 for a reason. I don't recall Kyle recharging his rifle. However, it's been a while since I've watched the video. Also, them claiming his hands were up is intentionally misleading at best with the way the prosecutor demonstrated it. Did we confirm that Gaige actually is a felon or not? I've heard mixed things on that. So I don't know if he's actually a felon, but I know he does have a criminal conviction because they talked about that in court today. It was the first question. Binger says, you've got a criminal conviction, right? Yes. How many? 1. Okay. So they've agreed on that. They basically stipulated that that they're not even going to argue about that, and it came out first in court. Whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor, I don't know. All right, let's see. We got a ton of questions. So if I skip some of the no names, that's what's happening. News Now Wyoming says, so he says he's not capable of taking a life. He never wanted to take a life. He didn't intend for him to pull his gun and kill Rittenhouse. If you don't think you can do it in the moment, why would you carry an illegal gun? Also, does his mindset matter for prosecuting Rittenhouse? All that matters is if a reasonable person could find that Rittenhouse perceived a threat to his life. Yeah, I mean, I've been arguing that Rittenhouse is only able to make decisions based on what he knows then and there. So if you try to go back and make an argument that Rosenbaum's medical records are very relevant, well, Kyle didn't know that, and he couldn't have known that about any of the different things going on in Gaige Grosskreutz's minds, his EMT training or any of that. Kyle couldn't have known that. The only thing he could know was what he was doing, standing there chasing him after a bunch of other people, after he's already communicated, I'm giving up, I'm running to the police. He sees him approach, hands up, then a gun comes out. He's got no choice. At that point, it doesn't matter if he was an EMT. It doesn't matter if he was Mother Teresa. You have to defend yourself. And whether an objective, reasonable person could do so at that moment is, I think, something that has been established. Former LEO says, first time I'm hearing about Kyle having to clear the action in any reports. Also the first time I heard that too. A couple other comments coming in, just giving them a quick read. Kenny1B says, even if Grosskreutz is 100% honest here, doesn't negate the fact that Kyle perceived Grosskreutz was trying to kill him. Kyle is still innocent. And a couple more before we jump into our final segment. Trowpat says, there's been a lot of other talk on other channels of a directed verdict. What say you, Mr. Grueller? And I see that another super chat from Ryan Henahan came in on that, asking that as well. You know, listen, I had previously said I think the answer is no. I still think the answer is no. The reason being is, you know, this is sort of a formal thing that exists in criminal law. You have a judgment of acquittal, a motion for acquittal, a motion for a dismissal, sort of after the case in chief has been presented by the prosecution, but it almost never gets granted because there's usually at least enough for the jury to make a decision. May not be great, but it's at least enough. And so here, I mean, you know how opinionated I am on this. I think that there's not much there, but there's probably still enough for the judge to give it to the jury. And I think that as a matter of policy, the judge is going to want to do that, right? The judge is not going to want to take this out of the jury's hands. It may even be just a political thing, because if he does that, and we already saw that he doesn't like it when he gets criticized by the media too much. He scolded the media pretty well. And so if he offends, you know, if he does something that's going to, you know, rock the boat too much, he may not like the consequences of that. Maybe he doesn't care, right? This judge is somebody who's obviously been around for a while. Doesn't seem like he is rattled by much of anything. So, you know, I doubt it. I don't think that there's going to be a directed verdict, but if the jury comes back, you know, you might have a judgment notwithstanding the verdict, or if the jury comes back with, you know, guilty. I just don't see it. It doesn't happen often. It's more of a formality. But it would be a wild turn of events if it did. No doubt about it. Former LEO says, stippling, I ain't got to show you no stinking stippling. I think that was from the last witness today. Nadarb says, I'm totally biased on this whole case, but man, that Gaige really came off as totally dishonest with the constant looking at the jurors every other syllable. It really bugged me. Yeah, he kind of did that thing, right? Sort of like the police do. News Now says, I was watching a few other YouTubers on Legal Bites chat. They said they wouldn't be surprised if the judge actually does a directed verdict when the prosecutor is done. I know it's rare. Do you think there's more of a slight chance after everybody's testified? So, yes, I talked about this with Nick last night. I told him, I said, a week ago, 0% chance on a directed verdict. Today, I don't know, 5 maybe 10 maybe, because the evidence has just been so bad. But still, that being said, you don't want a judge to sort of short circuit the process unless it's absolutely necessary and obvious. This is getting close to that. But still, judges are hesitant to do it. Leafy Bug says, Rob, saw you burning the midnight oil on Ricada's show. You did well, even though you seemed sleep deprived. It's true, I was, man. I appreciate you and your work ethic. I thought I was better. I thought I was like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty awake. And I got on there and like I lost my train of thought 2, maybe 3 times on the show. Like just blanked out. It doesn't happen to me. It's very strange. For me to not be able to just ramble on and on and on and on and on and on, it's a weird thing. So you might be able to go watch that and see what happens when rob.exe stops working. But we had fun. It was a good time. Deadmau says, prosecution portrayal of Gaige Grosskreutz. Let's see how things go. So he shared this link over from Watchers. Let's see how things go during cross-examination. That's what the prosecutors look like, holding their crucifix. All right, a couple more before we jump into our last segment. Speech says, this witness seemed to be the best one for the prosecutor so far. Why didn't the prosecutor lead with this witness in the first place? Probably a little bit to do with timing. Probably wanted to keep him sort of, you want to get out a lot of the boring stuff, and you want to save kind of a big bang for last. You're kind of the climax of the trial. And there's no coincidence that they put him on Monday, today, not on a Friday. So the jury's fresh. They have a nice weekend. They get to come see this. There's some of that just, timing strategy there as well. All right, I'm going to pick C-Rose says, Rob, where could the prosecution possibly go after today? We've come a long way since 4 doors, more whores. I started watching in 2013 and never seen a witness get impeached like Gaige did today. Did you see Rittenhouse holding back a smile? I did. I actually saw him sometimes not even holding it back to some degree, just going, oh man, this is crazy. And there were some times where I was watching him, I'm like, does he know what just happened there? Like, that was amazing. Does he even know? Probably not. All right, let's jump into the last segment and wrap it up before we finish all of the rest of the questions. We'll spend some serious time at the end of the show going through that, but we do have some more to get to. All right. Kyle Rittenhouse trial, day 6. We're closing out the afternoon witnesses in this segment. We have Heather Williams. You can see this crime lab technician. She's going to come in and talk about firearms and about bullets. We've also got Jason Kreuger, somebody who is with the Kenosha Police Department. He was out on patrol, and he was actually a partner to this guy we heard about a couple days ago, I think maybe yesterday, Pet Moretti, also a KPD police officer. So we heard from Jason. We're also going to hear from this fella, Kristen Harris. He was a live streamer. He was out on the scene. And I think they brought him in just to talk about that militia comment. You know, they really wanted that militia word to get in here and to be part of the theme that they present in front of the jurors. And so he was out here today. We're also going to hear from Detective Ben Antaramian. And he was the other detective who was working with this guy down here, Martin Howard. So we see that as the state is kind of coming to a close, they put one detective at the very beginning of the case. They put another detective at the very end of the case. They're saving Gaige Grosskreutz for the end of the case, obviously. And so we're going to just kind of check back in quickly with some of these Kenosha PD and this live streamer here in this segment. And so the first one we're going to start off with is Heather Williams. She was on direct exam. She came out today, talked about bullets, basically. Not much here, but just so we can see what happened in court today, here's what she talked about. Heather Williams.
So you were submitted 8 of the, if you hold up Exhibit 71 briefly, you were given 8 of those cartridges on top?
Yes, 8 fired cartridge cases, just like this one here, was submitted for this specific case and analyzed.
And did you find that all 8 of those cartridges were fired through the weapon that Detective Antaramian showed you?
Yes, I was able to determine that the 8 fired cartridge cases submitted in this case was fired in the submitted firearm.
And that was by comparing each one to the test-fired projectiles that you fired?
Correct, yes.
I have nothing further, thank you.
That's it. No cross-examination. That's it. Comes out. Bullets are what the bullets are. Okay. Anything, Corey? Nothing. All right. So we move on to the next person. Not much there. This is now Jason Kreuger. This is a Kenosha police officer, police department, who is detailing the unfolding of what happened when Kyle Rittenhouse was actually coming upon the police vehicle. Remember, we already heard from Pep, who was telling us that there was somebody else with him, a partner or somebody else who was in the vehicle, who may have pepper sprayed Rittenhouse or done something to try to, bark some verbal commands his direction. Anyways, this is Jason Kreuger, Kenosha PD today, trial day 6.
So what do you do as this person is approaching you on the street?
As I watched him approach, I was giving him verbal commands to keep away from my squad. I did not want anybody coming up directly to my squad that could be a potential threat. So we were giving him verbal commands just to stay back. I had also grabbed my pepper spray out of my vest and was going to use it if the individual continued to approach the car.
Why did you see him as a threat?
I never met him before. He had a rifle. Just given the situation at hand, there was a lot of circumstances where I just did not want some individual coming up to my squad car in that scene with there's gunshots still going off that I didn't necessarily know.
Okay, so verbal commands, stay away from the squad, doesn't like people coming upon him, pepper spray, considering whether there was a threat or not. Okay, again, all of these people are coming after the fact, didn't see anything about what happened between Kyle Rittenhouse and Gaige, or between Huber, or between Rosenbaum. And so we're still, kind of fleshing out what Kyle did after the fact. We've heard some statements, I think even from Thomas Binger, hinting that Rittenhouse, after he shot everybody, he just got up and ran away. He didn't stop and provide any medical aid or anything like that. So some of this testimony, I think, is relevant just to sort of wrap up the tail end of the event. We heard a lot about what led up to it, but we're sort of piecing together what the police did when Kyle Rittenhouse was actually approaching them. So that's what Jason Kreuger says that Rittenhouse said something, but something about a shooting that we can't really make out. No verbal indication that Kyle Rittenhouse said, I shot somebody. No verbal indication about Kyle Rittenhouse saying, I didn't shoot anybody. He just said something about it. Here's what the officer said today.
To the side, he's coming to your side, right?
Yes.
Do you hear him like say anything to you?
The only thing I can remember him saying was something about a shooting. That there was no other verbal indication from him coming directly saying it was me. It was just something about a shooting.
Okay, and you had just heard shots fired.
Yes.
This person's walking to you with his hands up and says something about a shooting, right?
I mean, his exact words were not something about a shooting,
No.
but
Fair. He says something. Included in that something is the word shooting.
yes.
Okay, so says something about a shooting. Again, Rittenhouse is running towards the police. We saw the video of that. You know, this testimony is coming from the government, it's coming from the prosecutors, and we're hearing that Kyle was trying to kind of turn himself in, right? He was trying to go and get help. So I don't, other than completing the sequence of events, the testimony is not particularly useful for the government. We also hear from this guy. This guy's name is Kristin Harris. Kristin Harris is a live streamer, works at a place called Rundown, and I think he does some B-roll footage, and sounds like he was the guy who actually recorded the Militia video footage. The Militia video footage we heard about previously, I think it was back during the Aunt Huber testimony, whatever that woman's name was. The government was trying to get this video admitted, and the defense objected because in that video, there was a lot of colorful language. The person who was actually recording the cell phone video was using the word militia all the time. Oh, here's the militia. Here's the militia. Oh, Kyle Rittenhouse, who happens to be with this group of people, are a part of the militia. And that's a pejorative word. Now, that sort of, evokes some emotions from people. And so they wanted to limit that. They said, no, you can't talk about those things. If Kyle is talking in that video, we can play the audio from that, but not anywhere else. And so we had a break. We had a conversation about, what ended up happening there. We don't know what the official ruling on that was, but this guy now shows up in court and they start talking about the militia word. Remember, the reason why you couldn't have that original militia language was because it's hearsay. It's language that is outside of a court that is coming in that's sort of trying to prove some of the facts of the case. Not that Kyle Rittenhouse is a militia member. That's not on trial here, but that he was a part of maybe a group that maybe was responsible for militia-like activities, which might include killing people. So it's got a little bit of a overly, biased connotation to it. And so they wanted to keep that out. But only because it's hearsay. You can't cross-examine that. You can't ask that person on the other side of the camcorder what they think a militia is or how they define militiamen or any of those things. You can't confront them. There's a confrontation clause issue there. So now they actually bring this guy in, Kristin Harris, and they start asking him about this, specifically about Rosenbaum. Was he around this part at all? Was Rosenbaum in the area at all that you saw? Here is Kristin Harris.
That at this moment in the video, the shootings are going to be in roughly 20 minutes or thereabouts after this.
Roughly, yes.
I see that the Bearcats and whatnot are in the road at this point in front of the 59th Street car source. Do you know where they traveled after this?
They traveled more forward towards 60th Street, I believe, and then they stopped there.
Did they establish a line keeping the protesters south of 60th at that point?
With the MRAPs, or Bearcats, yes.
Okay. So, is it fair to say, Mr. Harris, that for the remainder of your video, as far as you know, no protesters came back to 59th Street car source after this?
Not that I witnessed.
Two questions. First of all, do you independently remember at any point in the sequence of events that we've just seen, starting with that dumpster fire and all the way forward here, do you remember ever seeing Joseph Rosenbaum?
I do not.
After rewatching your video, is Mr. Rosenbaum in this video at any point during the series that we've just watched?
No, not that I can see.
I have nothing further.
Okay, so this guy gets up and leaves. So he gets up and leaves, and he still is needed because the cross-examination has to happen. And so he sits back down. It's kind of a funny moment. He's like, this is my first time here. I had no idea that I was going to have to finish. But it's pretty funny. But again, you can see what's happening. It's sort of like this disconnect. They're trying to say, well, you were in this area. Was Rosenbaum in the area? No, Rosenbaum wasn't in the area, but maybe some people who were part of Kyle's crew said that he was a part of the area, and that they saw him causing a bunch of ruckus, trying to light things on fire. We heard from Ryan Balch and many others that they were out there trying to stop Rosenbaum from being an aggressive Looney Tune. And this live streamer comes in. He's not anywhere in the area. Didn't see anything about it. Okay, so whether that is consequential or not, I don't think so. But you certainly can have him come in now, and that video that has to do with militia presumably can go in because the defense gets the opportunity to ask him about that. And they do so here. They say specifically, you know that language, militia, that word you're using, where does that come from? What's your basis for that? Do you just call everybody militia? Or what indicia are you using in order to justify that claim? Here is what he says.
Thanks for making me laugh. No, it's all right. First time.
Mr. Harris, on the video, you describe people as militia, right?
Correct.
You point up at the roof and say, "There's militia members up there," right?
That is correct.
That's your opinion. You didn't talk to any of them about. I'll ask it to you this way: you had no information that Mr. Rittenhouse was in any type of militia, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now,
okay, no details, no information, just a general claim. You know, it looks like some guys with guns. He called them militia. But were they? And when you actually dive into this, what was Rittenhouse actually doing? When you saw him, what did it look like he was trying to do there on the streets of Kenosha?
were you aware that there were homemade gas bombs being thrown?
One of the people on the roof did say that there was a homemade gas bomb, basically, I don't want to, ammonium and bleach. I don't know how they knew that, but that's what they claimed.
And you had said to Mr. Rittenhouse, I know you're just trying to make peace, right?
Correct.
Okay, so to be fair, he wasn't doing anything aggressively, correct?
I agree with that.
He wasn't verbally threatening anyone.
No, he was offering help.
He wasn't using his firearm in a way to scare or intimidate people by pointing it at them. Agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, so wasn't doing anything. Trying to make peace and good, wasn't using his firearm to be overly aggressive with anybody. And so, again, not a whole lot out of his testimony today. As I mentioned, I think that they had to bring him in here sort of as a foundational witness. They really wanted to get that video footage in back from when Aunt Huber was testifying from that guy saying militia, 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 militia. Okay, they bring him in now. If the defense doesn't like the word militia, they get to ask him about it. Guess what? They did. He explained it. Turns out he has no idea at all that it's militia. So it's likely that that video that we heard is probably going to go in front of the jury, and they are going to get to hear that now that there's been a caveat that it's sort of been explained that, you know, it's just his opinion. So I think that's about all that he was brought in for, more or less. Don't get much else from him in terms of any observations. You know, you're kind of waiting for that one live streamer or that one witness or something that can go in there and offer us a completely alternative set of facts here. And we haven't seen it, right? Something that expands the scope. Something like Kyle Rittenhouse was firing off guns, previously, earlier in the night, where he was doing something reckless, like he was threatening somebody else previously. Something that would reframe the entire ordeal that we've been talking about for a year and a half in a new light. Like if we learn that in a back alley, Kyle Rittenhouse, shot a dog or something like that, right? You'd go, whoa, okay, that changes the entire equation, because now we know that there's something else that happened here that we didn't know about, and it sort of changes how you think about the whole thing. So you're kind of waiting for something like that. Now, that doesn't happen in criminal cases because of discovery. We know what the other side has or should know, and if it's this big late-minute drop, I have the murder weapon, right? There's all sorts of ways that you get that stuff precluded and thrown out for discovery rule violations. So we haven't been expecting anything, but we've at least been expecting a little bit of an adjustment narrative. Some witness who was going to come in and tell us something that we didn't know. We have one more witness who came out today. This is Detective Ben Antaramian, who was the other detective involved in the case. Remember, the first guy was, I can't remember his name, Detective Martin Howard, who was kind of browsing the internet all day downloading a bunch of the Kyle Rittenhouse videos, kind of the same thing that I was doing back then when we were making videos here. And he talked about, all the work he did, getting subpoenas, talked a lot about downloading documents and interviewing people. But his partner is this guy, Detective Ben Antaramian, who was in court today and talks a little bit about some of the interactions with Gaige Grosskreutz specifically. Let's listen to what his direct exam sounds like.
Once you kind of get to the meat and potatoes about what had happened with him, he refused to answer your questions. Is that right?
He consulted with his attorney and...
One second. I'm not sure why that didn't play. I had a direct exam.
Now, you were asked...
Trying to get this one video to play. Let's see if I can get it going. All right, try this one.
Once you kind of get to the meat and potatoes about what had happened with him, he refused to answer your questions. Is that right?
He consulted with his attorney and, yeah, we did not get all of our questions answered.
Did you have an opportunity to confront him with the, as you describe them, inconsistencies or discrepancies with his original statement? Did you have an opportunity to kind of talk to him about those?
I attempted to, yeah.
Would he answer those questions?
No.
No?
No, he would not, sorry.
Okay, so Grosskreutz is talking about, this detective is talking about Grosskreutz. And recall that very early on in this trial, there was a lot of conversation about this. Mark Richards was having an interaction, I think it was with the first detective, Martin Howard, and said, hey, when you were investigating this case, you wanted to see what was in Kyle Rittenhouse's phone, didn't you? And it was an iPhone, and those are very hard to crack into. And so you said that you needed to send Kyle's phone back over to the FBI so that they could, try to crack it for you. They told you probably not going to happen. And so we got wind of that, the defense, me and Kyle Rittenhouse, and we decided we'll help you out. We'll give you the code. We'll give you the whole phone. We'll give you access to everything that's on there. Just give us a copy of what you find. Gives them access, permission to go and make a full image, to take every single shred of everything that's on this phone and make an exact one-to-one copy that you can put on a hard drive and that you can treat as though it's a phone. It's different than me sending somebody some pictures. Oh, let me send you a picture of, whatever I took a picture of. It's not like that. It's you get the whole raw file so you can see everything that went on there. Kyle Rittenhouse agreed to do that. Said no problem at all. You want it? You got it. Gaige Grosskreutz, though, didn't. And part of that was because of something called Marcy's Law. The government went and they got a search warrant. They filed a probable cause affidavit in front of a judge. A judge reviewed the case, decided there's enough here to grant a warrant, granted it, was going to go serve it on Gaige Grosskreutz and his attorney, and then got called off, was not allowed to do that. We're going to hear about why. Before we see that, we have the officer telling us that day, that whole sequence of days, the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the most chaotic days of your professional life is what he said. Just like all the other officers have confirmed for us. A war zone through and through. Here it is.
The night of the 24th and the night of the 25th is the most chaotic days of your professional life. Is that fair?
I'd include the 23rd, but 23rd and 24th.
So those days, 23rd, 24th, 25th, most chaotic days that you've had as a detective or a police officer even.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, most chaotic days as a police officer. And then we get one final question. I believe this is the judge who doesn't like sort of the line of questioning where this goes. Corey Chirafisi is asking this detective, when you saw the video of Kyle running down the street, was Gaige Grosskreutz and sort of the rest of the mob there, were they chasing Rittenhouse? Can you tell us sort of your interpretation of that? What do you think that looked like, detective? Here is Corey. Well, I don't know why my videos aren't playing. Let me try one other thing. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can play it one other way. because the judge kind of scolds him a little bit.
Describe Mr. Grosskreutz based on your observations of him running after Mr. Rittenhouse.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is characterizing a video we've all seen. The jury can draw their own conclusions. Mr. Grosskreutz has already testified on this point.
Overruled.
Could you repeat what you asked, please?
Did you, based on your training and experience as a police officer, watching the videos, did it appear to you that Mr. Grosskreutz behind him?
Behind his path.
Okay. No comment on the witness's answer, either orally or with facial reaction.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so the detective sort of refuses to answer the question, says something like, I'm not comfortable saying that, don't know how to address that directly. And Corey makes a little bit of a face, goes, okay, all right, you can't say that. You can't even acknowledge that he was being chased. The judge didn't like that. The judge said, hey there, Corey, take it easy on those facial expressions. Okay, we can all see that. So that was the end of the day. A lot of closeouts there, closing testimony, a lot of big witnesses today. Of course, Gaige Grosskreutz being the biggest. Talked about him in the first segment today. Let's see what you have to say about this over from our friends at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. See what some of the questions look like. We have a lot of them. We've got LA Medic says Kyle's self-defense claim with Grosskreutz. On the ground, having beaten and chased, Grosskreutz self-defense claim heard that Kyle shot someone and chased after him. Said nothing to Kyle, that he was friendly, had a firearm, was advancing on Kyle. Weighing the merits, Kyle wins. That's from LA Medic, sort of balancing those out. Good analysis there. Former LEO says in all of the police interviews and the filing of the civil cases, he never mentioned that he was armed with a handgun. He's got no credibility. That's from a former LEO in the house. Leafy Bug says they rammed into each other in the middle of Bumsville. LOL, where'd that come from? Where I come from, bum means your butt, so your hypothetical scenario has a very different connotation. Also says, sorry, I'm very immature. It's okay. Well, Bumsville. That's what they say. Don't they say that? Don't people say that? News Now says, we have seen the co-counsel take a lot more active role in questions. He started out only making arguments. Do you think the defense attorneys received word that the primary attorney was coming off horrible in his demeanor and tone? I know ego might not allow an attorney to accept that. LOL. I don't think so. I think that what you're seeing is sort of natural. I think Corey is a little bit more of a cross-examiner, just sort of naturally than Mark, and so you switch things up based on your skills. That's all. D. Delsby says, not going to lie, other than being 300,000 miles away from the microphone and thus being unable to hear him half the time, I'm very impressed with Chirafisi in this case. He knows the right things to hit. It's made things since last Wednesday feel like a real-life TV legal show. It's true, D. Delsby. That's right. He is somebody who walks around the courtroom all the time, and it is hard to pick up the audio, definitely, which is frustrating for us viewers out here. But yes, he's doing a good job. And this has been one of those trials where it's like, man, I cannot believe some of these lines of questioning. The re-racking comment from Gaige, I was not expecting that. I was listening to that going, whoa, where'd that come from? Pretty interesting. Okay, a couple other ones here. News Now says, any guess on if Rittenhouse testifies? I know in defense opening he inferred that he is, but watching Legal Bites and others, they say it'd be legal malpractice to call him at this point. Only allow the prosecution to grab victory from the throes of defeat. I agree with you, News Now. I think that it's not a good call. It's typically not a good call to have a defendant testify in general. Right? You almost never benefit from having a defendant testify, but in this case, I don't think there's any reason to at all. Thunder7 says, is Grosskreutz being charged with breaking curfew, carrying a firearm, or recklessly shooting his gun? The police got it all wrong. The Antifa thug should have been charged. I never knew he was aiming for a $10 million payout, while the gall of the criminal playing the victim to get a big payday. I think this country has had it with these violent Antifa losers. That's from Thunder7. Yeah, good to see you, Thunder. David Ordorf says, if I were Kyle right now, I would be relieved that Grosskreutz lived. His testimony has been very, very beneficial to Kyle's defense. It's from David. I agree with you on that. It was a good day for the Rittenhouse team. Three Girlies says, I came in late, had to rewind the feed a little bit to see the direct exam. This guy still Can't sit still to save his life. He's not even keeping proper eye contact. Body language is screaming shady. If you look at the cops, they answered straight towards the jury. They were face on, most likely making eye contact. Gaige is everywhere in his chair. Like he can't sit still. Just on his body language alone, I don't know how many juror put any stock into what he's saying. I was able to fast forward. Now I'm at the part where there is a lawsuit. Not sure anybody, especially the jurors, are going to believe anything this guy says. Yet another shooting in the foot for the prosecution. That's from Three Girlies. Very astute observation there, Three Girlies. I'm glad you made it over here. D. Delsby says, I could be wrong, but there was some very interesting imagery in this witness testimony, with one of the pictures being the arm exploding actively. It was very interesting and gruesome to see. I almost felt bad for Grosskreutz to have to relive those images on the stand. Yeah, I mean, totally. You know, he's probably still in a ton of pain. It's a life-changing injury. It's a tragedy of life for everybody involved. And so, you know, got to keep that in mind. Okay, let's jump over to YouTube and see what we've got coming in over here. Jay says, great job, Robert. Thank you, Jay. Bianca says, I think we got that one. Couldn't Kyle and the defense have gotten up and yelled? Yes, we saw that one. Have you heard about the guy who's got people with cameras in Kenosha, clearly threatening jury intimidation on Twitter? That's from LA. And I did see that. I heard that might have been George Floyd's cousin or something like that. I talked about it with Ricada yesterday, and I saw another image of this that apparently he posted another one today. Apparently the story goes, there's George Floyd's cousin or somebody on the internet who is saying that they have people in the courtroom in Kenosha taking pictures of the jurors seated next to Kyle Rittenhouse, and that if they don't convict, there's going to be repercussions for them, which is illegal. That's called jury tampering. It's called interference with judicial proceedings, all sorts of major problems as a result of those threats, but we'll see if anybody does anything about it. Iceman says, question for later, detective says drone footage shows Kyle pointing a gun at Rosenbaum before the chase. How impactful if proven? So it's only going to be impactful as to the extent that it matters to the jurors. I mean, ultimately, you know, and it depends on what we're talking about in terms of the pointing. As I mentioned earlier, if this whole narrative changes because Kyle Rittenhouse, we have footage of him going to Rosenbaum. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to execute you, you know, Baldy, something like that, right? That would be a total game changer. But if it's incidental, if Kyle's running down, you know, the road to help provide medical treatment to somebody, and, you know, the gun is sort of pointed at Rosenbaum incidentally for a split second, you know, that's not going to be enough. That's going to be incidental, and it's not going to be considered anything overly consequential. TC says, when Detective Antarim makes his statement about the prosecution suggesting him not request a cell phone under Mary's Law, it seemed very sus, right? Totally. Absolutely 100% was. And it's a situation where the prosecution is trying to kind of paper over this fact that there were double standards. Kyle Rittenhouse was thoroughly investigated by law enforcement. They were going to do a parallel, symmetrical investigation of Gaige Grosskreutz, but his attorney and Gaige, they cut it all off. I mean, they literally precluded further conversations from happening. And so when you're able to get that out in front of the jury, it sort of crumbles that facade that Gaige was putting out there, that he's this heroic, you know, EMT, somebody who's out there trying to help a lot of people. No, maybe not really, because you're kind of dishonest about a bunch of stuff. Good question. Let's see what else here. Former LEO says that wasn't a meatball, that was an S sandwich. Sharon says, I love that part where Grosskreutz gets the meatball. Extra spicy one, too. He got a spicy meatball there. Also says, what I want to know is how this turkey ever came to trial. Prosecutorial misconduct, she says. And Grosskreutz with his $10 million civil suit. That doesn't get laughed out of town. Well, I don't know. Well, you know, we'll see. Maybe he'll hit the lottery. Leafy Bug says all of Gaige's medical training and his ethics prompted his sincere desire to empty the entire magazine into Kyle. Obviously. Well, we're going to hear from Mr. Marshall soon, and we'll see what he has to say about it. John Halgren says, oof, this page shows all of the Marshall Facebook posts referencing the hospital visit. Let's take a look at this one, John. See what we've got here. Ooh, yeah, there's some violent, or there's some imagery there. Got to be careful on Facebook. You know, on YouTube. Oh, yeah, there's some juicy stuff over there. Let's look at this. Says, Jacob Marshall says, should have killed him right then and there. That's his cell phone. He was on live recording. Nice try, though. Uh-oh. Well, we're going to get Jacob Marshall in court here pretty soon, I think. So we'll see how that testimony goes for the prosecution. Good to see you, John. Few more. Trowel Pat says, a lot of the meatballs and meat sauce tonight, Rob. Do you miss or are you looking forward to dinner? Well, I do, I just happen to like meatballs. And today there was a pretty big spicy one delivered. Peely Wally says, hey, Rob, how was your weekend? What do you think are the chances of a directed verdict incoming? Judge must believe there's hardly a case to answer now. Well, weekend was good. It was quite busy. Was doing we had a 3-hour locals meetup on Saturday. Then we did about 2.5 hours with Nick as I was falling asleep on camera with him yesterday. And so it was a lot of fun, a lot of camera time. But that's what it's all about. Sharon says, if there's any justice, which I doubt, Grosskreutz can kiss his 10 million goodbye. We'll see if that happens. Nadarb says, these courts really got to update their equipment and invest in some wireless mics, especially for Chirafisi. Yeah, he's walking all over the place. Can you stay still for 2 seconds? We're trying to do a show here, Corey. Hello? You're making it difficult for us to enjoy the trial. Former LEO says, did you see the look of the face on the court stenographer? Priceless. Yeah, I don't think she was a clerk. She was a stenographer. She was typing away. She goes, huh? What just happened? Is this whole trial thrown out now? Okay, well, I guess I'll just keep typing away. All right. Deadmau says, do you think the defense attorney can be charged with the attempted murder of Grosskreutz? It's pretty close. I mean, it's not far off from there. Trowelpat also says, when Gaige said that Kyle didn't fire until he pointed the gun at him, Kyle looked like one of two things. One, he wanted to jump out of his seat with joy or wanted to cry because he knew what that meant. Yeah, it was a big moment for him, no doubt about that. Cuomo's Revenge is here, says 8/5/20 should only be referred to as the Rittenhouse self-defense incident, or alternatively, the Rosenbaum aggression. 8/25 is the National Self-Defense Day. We'll see what happens here. Hopefully, it's something to celebrate. We have another one from News Now says, I still don't understand how the defense didn't argue against a detective describing what the high detail drone footage shows without showing it. Yeah, and News Now, it is confusing. I think what we're seeing with a lot of this stuff is only like half the story. I think a lot of what is coming through on the internet is only part of it. The rest of this stuff is conversations that are taking place up at the bench or behind chambers. So, it's hard to really gauge what's going on, which is why it feels like that. So you're not alone, in other words. Nick and I were talking a lot about that last night. It's hard to make heads or tails about what certain motions in limine are, or what the different arguments that are going to be allowed are, because there's no formal rulings. The judge just kind of allows things to come in and then deals with them on the fly. Okay, a couple other questions. We've got News Now says, why didn't the attorney ask a question like, you explained that you rack a bullet to clear a weapon. Have you ever heard of people racking a gun as a warning? Oh, that's another good question from News Now. Possible. It could have been a good one. 3 Girlie says, good Lord, where in the world did these prosecutors think that this guy was going to be a good witness? Those smoking guns continue to be shot at the feet of the prosecutors. They can't even dance fast enough right now. This guy totally exonerates. Kyle Rittenhouse. That's from 3 Girlies. We've got Feisty Lady says, not sure if you saw the judge have an attorneys meeting at the bench after the jury dismissed for the day. All attorneys at the bench looks like a secret witness came into the courtroom. Then all attorneys, the witness, and the judge went into the chambers. Must have been some big powwow with the judge. Also, ex-roommate of Gaige going to testify on Wednesday. Wonder if he's aware of a $10 million lawsuit and will want a few pesos from Gaige for his testimony about the Facebook posts. Is video quality good enough after enhancement to tell if Kyle actually re-racked his weapon or not? It's a good question. I don't know. So I would think so, but you'd have to have a good angle. If you had the right footage, I think you could tell. But that's the first time that I ever heard of it. I didn't see any hints of that prior to today. AOC says, well, Robert Gruler, reading the super chats before the locals chats. Who cares about the peasants at locals when you can shower in the super chat money? I wonder who that is. I think I have an idea of who may be submitting that here today, but it's true. Major says, if he was a fellow, it matters that his concealed license is expired because he's now a prohibited person for owning a firearm. Yeah, he could have been charged with another crime. Prohibited possessor is the name of that. 503 Unlimited says, if anyone wants a few examples of cops lying to not implicate their failures, may I present these LEOs? Man, the smirk on that one detective really got under my skin when he was playing word games. I'm glad he got the business. It's from 503 Unlimited. talking about that last detective there this afternoon. Soul Viking is here, says, what happens if Marshall doesn't appear on Wednesday or is, quote, coached before then? Well, he's got his Facebook posts that can be used to sort of, impeach him over. You posted this. Why did you say he said that if he didn't say that? That's going to be a very uncomfortable line of questioning for him. If he doesn't appear, well, then he's probably, the judge can decide what to do for him, issue a warrant for his arrest or hold him in contempt. There's a couple of different ramifications there, but he'll show. Trowpot says, I agree with you about the directed verdict issue. The judge doesn't like anyone questioning his decisions. He smacked down the large prosecutor commenting on his decision. He's made comments about the media. And don't forget him commenting on one of his decisions that the Supreme Court shot down and later reversed and agreed with him. Yeah, which is why, I think he's just going to let the jury have it. Pelosi's Fun Bangs says, no chance it's a directed verdict. Going to go to the jury. Judge already said he wants public confidence in the trial, which is right. It's a good point. 503 says, I watched all of this on Recaita's stream from the last couple of days. It's been crazy. That being said, I'd like a motion to try defendants' lawyers for murder because they killed Gaige. He had a tough day. Peely Wally says, hey, Rob, why did they not ask the police if someone attacking them like Rittenhouse was being attacked, whether or not they would have fired their weapon? Okay, you know for a fact that they would have as soon as the threat was clear. Good to see you there, Peely Wally, and a good question, good comment as well. Trowpot says, forgive me if you addressed this already. Did you see the detective smirk when he answered questions the way Binger wanted him to? I think it was Nick Recaita that said, if you want to see a cop lie, watch a criminal trial. Woo, that's a spicy meatball right there from Nick. News Now says, question, I expected the defense to ask that cop who pepper sprayed Rittenhouse, based on your training and experience as an officer, how many suspects who want to get away from the police go towards the police car with their hands in the air? Prosecutor with the detective seems to make a big deal about Kyle leaving. Yeah, that would have been another good question, News Now. You got some good questions. Maybe you should be somebody who cross-examines people, like a lawyer. Trowpot says, the only thing the prosecution has proven is that Kyle shot those 3 people. Duh. We all knew that. I know we've all talked about it. It's not news. But for some reason, they still, look, to be fair to them, they have to go through the motions, right? They have to prove the elements of the case. So a lot of this is tedious because that's just how criminal law can be. Go Navy says, I don't know why this is still going on. If I were on the prosecution team, I'd drop the charges, try to get a job at a car wash or something. That would be, that's an approach here. Maybe they could do a better job cleaning cars. Greg Marat says, not sure what the law is here, but shouldn't Grosskreutz be charged with advancing Kyle and pointing a loaded gun with an intention to shoot and kill Kyle? He could have. So if the prosecution had decided to go that way, they could have gone that way, but they didn't, right? And so they're not going to go that way. Criminal law oftentimes is going to be an either or situation. They're going to look at a situation and they're going to say, Rittenhouse is more criminally culpable than the other guy or the other guys. And so in this case, he gets the charges. They leave the others alone. And that's just how it goes sometimes, right? Think about it like in a domestic violence case. Sometimes you have a domestic violence case and it's a man and a woman or whatever, and there's an altercation that occurs. Both people are ultimately sort of responsible for it or contributory to the ultimate argument, but they don't charge both people with crimes. They pick one, charge one, the other person is a victim. It's just how it goes. Even though they both may have hit each other, they both may have broke something or threw things around, they're still only going to charge one of the two. In most situations, when they do charge both of them have a very good defense because all they have to do is remain silent and don't tell on each other, and the prosecution has no witnesses in most cases, and they have no choice but to dismiss. So just because 2 people technically broke the law doesn't mean that prosecutors are going to necessarily prosecute both of them. They have to make a choice on the back of practicalities, and that often leads them to only being able to charge one side of the equation. Major says, in regards to the question about re-racking, maybe since Kyle is not a trained soldier, he didn't fully pull the charging handle, instead just recocked the hammer, so there wouldn't be extra brass spent or unfired. As a trained soldier, it is drilled into us not to do this, but fully pull the handle. Well, that's from Major in the house. That is some good detail on the firearms. I appreciate that. News Now says, in all the trials I've watched since OJ, the detective questioning includes my new favorite line of questioning I've ever seen. When the defense is asking the detective if in his training and experience he felt Gaige was chasing Kyle, That whole line of questioning ended with getting scolded by the judge for his facial expressions because it was stupid the cop wouldn't agree with him, even in all the face of the evidence. Yeah, it looks petty, right? The jurors see that too. They go, ugh, he was chasing him. Can you just say he was chasing him? But they want to get squirrely on those things because people just dig their heels in. Okay, couple more. Sniper says, the best thing that ever happened to this case was the fact that Rittenhouse did not get taken into custody that night, got to go home, because who knows if he would have been smart enough to lawyer up that night without having diarrhea mouth with the cops because of the adrenaline and the fact that he had just murked 2 people. I know firsthand the after effects of a young man killing somebody for the first time. Blessing in disguise, he didn't turn himself in that night. Might have been a disaster. Could have been. Yeah, no doubt about that. It was, not the best... Not the best defense when he went over to Illinois because he sat in custody for 2 months. I thought that was unnecessary, but he did. He had, I think, some questionable legal counsel at that time. Monster One says, did you see the look on Kyle's face when the defense got to Gaige to admit that he wasn't shot until he pointed the gun at Kyle? Honestly, it looked like he was going to cry. Looked like that was the moment he realized he won. Well, it may have been that moment, so a good day for him. Tree Mendes says, isn't it kind of funny that the jury is supposed to believe that Grosskreutz wasn't chasing Kyle, but that Kyle was chasing Rosenbaum based on some infrared footage from the FBI? It's going to be a tough sell. Okay, we've seen about 20 different angles of Grosskreutz chasing Kyle. He wouldn't use that word. Same thing with Rosenbaum. So I'm not sure, what some FBI drone footage is going to show. Bumma Lickett is here. Saw Bumma Lickett over the weekend on our monthly locals meetup. A lot of fun. Had a hysterical revelation that Bumma Lickett was maybe being pronounced incorrectly, but we'll save that for another day. She says, the ends justifies its means. You can bring a gun on a chaotic environment and someone got shot and died. I really don't know where I stand on this, but to be honest, that 17-year-old kid should not be out there. Because of a situation might happen and can be prevented. Now look at what he's facing. So young to me in this mess. My heart goes to the families involved. Hold on to your faith and stay strong. Yeah, a terrible situation, Bumma Lickett. No doubt about it, right? Awful. City of Kenosha being burnt to the ground, rioters, protesters, whatever you want to call them. You've got a lot of people trying to protect themselves, protect their businesses, their livelihood. It was very chaotic, and it's very sad that our current, government and political environment kind of fosters all of this and really encourages it, wants both sides to kill each other to some degree. Former LEO says, stippling, you didn't cover it. I didn't cover it. You're right. We kind of skipped over the technical stuff there. Edon Tess says, great job. This is what I came here for. I'm riveted, even when listening in the car. Well, thank you, Edon Tess. Love that. Hope you're doing well out there, my friend. And we had our final one from former LEO says, if the grand jury knew that Gaige was armed, maybe no indictment. That could be true. Yeah, it could be true if they would have had the facts there. Let's see. We had another one from C. Reed says, wondering about the drone timestamp +4 the 26. Huh. Yeah, so the drone, I'm not sure what you're getting at there, C. Reed. +4 the 26, because this happened on the 25th. So I'm not sure what you're referencing, but maybe we'll see more of that tomorrow. Fighter for the Street with a nice donation. Thank you, Fighter for the Street. And I think that was it, my friends. All the questions that came in today. This was Rittenhouse trial day 6. A lot of amazing thoughts and input there. Want to welcome some new people to our community. Big shout outs to the next unicorn. Welcome to our community. Official Glitch also joined up at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got Da Biff in the house. Welcome to Da Biff. We've got Custodes P. New, Robert Emery in the house, along with Chip Von Shoulder. All joined us over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, along with Paralaw 406, Crime Junkie Jekka. We've got Future Freedom Now. Love that. Briggs 57. We've got Gecko Man. We've got PWS MKAZ. We have CPO Forever and D. Delsby in the house. G Nonsense, Fratbod, Flea J, Bad Guy, CC, very clever name, Mind Magician, C Rose, and Hyperspectral, Aaron Caroline. All joined our community here at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where a lot of these questions come from, where there are chats that take place, We're doing live streams now exclusively over there a few days a week. We have copies of the slides that we go through every day are available over there. Free PDF version of my book is available for download, Beginning to Winning, How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. We have monthly locals meetups that we just had this past Saturday. It was on November 6th. We have another one that will get organized and up in December. And so we want you to be a part of our community because we have a lot of fun and we talk a lot about a lot of good stuff. And so come check us out. watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And that, my friends, is it for me for the day. I want to thank you so much for joining in on the Kyle Rittenhouse recap. We're going to do it all again tomorrow because we've got a couple days of trial left. Not sure if we're going to be wrapping up this week. They said so. So the government's going to be resting soon enough, and we're going to hear from the defense. And so we want you to be a part of the show when we do that. So join us yet again here tomorrow. It's due to the time change. It's still 4 p.m. Arizona time, which is now Mountain time. So it's 3 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that, wait, that's not right. It's 4 p.m. Arizona, 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. on the East. Okay, let's try that one more time. 3 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Mountain, 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. on the East Coast, and for that one Florida man. And we're going to do it all again here tomorrow at those times. I hope you can come and join us, everybody. Until then, have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye, my friends.